Joe, please introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Joe. I'm a PhD candidate. I look at language philosophy in particular, and I love to look at gender as like my subject to look at. And I love Alice, to be honest. I'm a huge Alice stan. So I'm really excited to have this conversation because I think sometimes these conversations so quickly devolve into people just being like, I'm right. And I actually feel like Alice and I can have a super fruitful discussion where we can like give you a lot of information and just like be good faith with one another on this topic, which I think is super duper interesting. And I'm excited to hear what she has to say on a lot of this. So yeah.
Okay, great. Next, we have Alice After All. Alice, a good friend of the channel. We're always excited to have her around. Alice, since the last time I've seen you, what paradigms have you shifted?
I don't think I've shifted any paradigms, and I feel bad following up Joe with like Joe's like PhD candidacy, and I'm just like, I work in customer support, and I work with people who they want to use products. But I do like talking about this, and I like being in good faith, and I feel like I'm going to learn. I feel like we're going to be able to have a good conversation, so I'm looking forward to that, and really glad to see a different format. I think this is going to be interesting, so I'm looking forward to that too.
Absolutely. Okay.
And just to be super clear, the number one thing you learn in a PhD program is that PhD programs suck and mean nothing. And there's no reason that everything you learn out of pure interest has, like, you probably know more than I do, quite honestly. I mean, that, and I want to say that to the whole audience. Anyone who throws their doctorate in your face is a piece of shit.
Well, I mean, I think I've established through our debates that I definitely know more than Joe. So, I mean,
I didn't go that far.
Okay. So I'm actually still learning this program. So let's see. If I take myself off screen, can you still hear me? Can you hear me?
No.
No?
Nope, we cannot hear you.
You can't hear me. Okay, great. All right.
Well, this is weird. This is awkward.
Hey, Alice, how you going?
Okay.
How's it going?
All right, then. Then let's do this. Mute yourselves here. Jump into my Discord. We'll use that audio in case I have to like actually tell you guys something.
Cool.
Yeah. And then we'll go from there. So there I am. There she is, and wait, no, there she is. All right, pulling her in. All right, so mute yourselves. Okay, you already did. Right.
Wait one second. I gotta mute my Google. There you go.
Okay. Sure. Let me put up your volumes.
You threw me off so much there. You were like,
what? Oh, yeah.
Really in my head. I heard like 4 of you.
Oh, yeah. Sorry about that. Okay, great. I think we're all good. All right, so I'm going to take myself off the screen. As you'll be seeing, audience members, men are unnecessary. That's the whole point of this conversation. Oh, that's right. I got to unmute myself here because of that mic thing. All right, I'll unmute myself here and mute myself there. All right, let's do that. Okay. You can still hear me? Great. All right. Off I go.
Okay. I can't hear you at all now.
Okay, that's because you have to. You've got to unmute your Chrome. Wait, no. Now I can't hear him at all. I don't know what he's doing.
I know.
Because I wasn't talking. I wasn't talking. You can't hear me?
I can hear you. I can hear you here. Are you gonna like rejoin if you have to?
Yeah. I'll rejoin if I have to.
Okay.
Yeah.
I got it.
Okay.
I understand.
Okay, great.
Okay,
So
I can't hear. So what do I have to do?
What, you can't hear
we
me?
just have to talk. We just have to talk.
Okay.
Just unmute your Chrome tab when you need to. Like unmute your Chrome tab.
Oh, you muted your Chrome tab? Don't mute your Chrome tab. Just, I don't know. What do you... All right, my God. This is not that hard. Okay. Well, how about this?
No. Joe, it's okay. Joe, just unmute the tab so Prime is going to talk in here.
Okay. All right. Okay. Great. All right. So, all right.
Intellectual.
Professional streamer. Okay. I think we got it now. Okay. So, whoa. Okay. Yeah, I know, right? Like high def. So
just back up. Yeah, go.
I know. I feel like I have to like recenter myself. Be like back here. Okay. I look like I'm dying. I'm not dying. I'm just jaundiced. It's almost the same. So we wanted to talk about like gender abolition. So, but other people like brought this up before. What does gender mean to you? So, and I think that's like, I do think we have to pin that down first. So what does it mean to you? And I want to know that first.
I mean, and this is something I find really interesting. And this is like, as I was thinking about how we would talk about this in the car, I was like, oh no, it's going to devolve into the like, what is gender conversation? But I don't think you can have this conversation without that one, because you can't talk about abolishing a concept without understanding what it is you're trying to abolish, which is what I constantly come back to. So for me, gender is two things. One, okay, first of all, it's not a real thing. It's not based on anything critical and real, right? It's something that is socially constructed, and it is performative in terms of gender is something that we do. In one sense, that's what it means to me conceptually. Categorically, it's something that is teleological, so it's for a purpose. So the category of woman exists so that within a judicial system where we have representation and we're fighting to get representation, the category of woman exists because we have inequalities and we need to have a discursive ability to talk about our experience and to talk about who we are and how we identify. It has the ability to do that, so it's doing something. It has a result. So for me, conceptually, it relates to the sort of performance of gender, which is based on nothing in particular. It's sort of something that we've created over time. It is important for me to say that I don't think that all parts of that performance are related to any kind of oppression or harm. I think there are aspects of gender which are free from that experience. And so that's partly why I have an issue with gender abolition, because I think the target is wrong. Because for me, gender exists beyond this realm of like just oppression and harm. And yeah, so that's for me what it's about, the ability to do things with language, and gender is something which is done.
Right.
What does it
So
mean for you?
can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah, of course.
So, you said there's some things that like so some of it is like a categorization that ends up being like sometimes oppressed. But you said that there's some things about it that are like that are good, right? That can be like
Yeah.
positive. Can you tell me some of the things that you think that can be positive about like gender? So like in this case, you're talking like a man or a woman. Like what are some things that can be positive about that categorization?
Well, I mean, I think it's possible to imagine a woman or a man who experiences their gender outside of an understanding of pure subordination, right? So, like, and this is why I think in the last conversation when gender euphoria was brought up, I wish we could have expanded on that more. And I'd love for you to expand on that. Because for me, there are aspects, of course, where I feel oppressed or subjugated on account of my gender, but I also get a lot of joy out of things that are not meaningfully related necessarily to gender. So this is so gender for me is a cluster concept as well, right? So I don't need to exhibit literally every single thing that we consider to be a woman to be doing. Like someone could be a woman and not view the same things as me as being part of being woman. So like if I say, I enjoy this is falling into that trap of what I was playing with last time. But like if I say I enjoy girly things and I enjoy hanging out with other women and I enjoy that sort of thing, that's not to say that that is what being a woman is constituted of. It's to say maybe that is a part of the experience of being a woman. Maybe that is something that I perform while being a woman that I enjoy, that I don't necessarily find connected to harm. It may be connected to a paradigm of power where I'm not doing that out of necessarily a desire. But then I think we get into a really messy place where it's like, how can you tell when you're doing something because you want to do it and when you're doing it because society is telling you to do it? It's
Yeah.
almost impossible to distinguish that.
And we're not good at it anyway. So yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think that helps a little bit put it into context for me. And I'll explain like my concept. And I think
Yeah.
my concept and your concept are pretty similar. So you definitely put it in perspective for me that there's like some things that you like about like being able to express yourself like as a woman. So you've mentioned like women as a category. So what fits into that category? And you don't have to answer extensively, right? Because we don't need to get into that. But like what is the shared like thing about that category for you? Because I think that there can be different experiences. So what unites all those experiences?
And this is the problem, right, with any sort of discussion about categories, is that categories are by necessity exclusionary.
Exclusionary.
There are people who fall outside of a category. Now, I come from a school of thought that it bases categories on prototypes. So it's not a set of criteria that you have to meet to be included in a category. Instead, there's like this ideal prototype that sits at the center that has all the ideal qualities of the person in that category. And then you sort of fade out to fuzzy boundaries on the sides where categories can overlap. There can be different, and depending on context, the prototype can shift. So this is like the more modern understanding of what a category looks like. So for me, it's not so much about setting out a criteria. And I think that prototype theory also really shows the history of like how shit feminist movements have been in terms of like, so if I'm saying the category of gender exists so that we can do something, that's clear for the feminist project, right? We've used the category of woman time and time again to push for change, but we've excluded Black women, we've excluded trans women, we've excluded sex workers because we've decided they fall outside of the category. But the category does have a changeable prototype and fuzzy boundaries. So I'm a big believer in doing without knowing. I think you can do political activism without having a solid category underneath it. And I think there's a risk in making that category too solid and trying to define boundaries because you actually make that exclusion more rigid. Whereas when you leave it fuzzy, it's easier to sort of ameliorate and move the category as necessary.
I agree with you there, but I think that one of the critiques that I hear is like that essentially, well, if we're gonna have this movement of feminism and we have this category that we're fighting for, then we have to have a reason to fight for that category. So, for instance, women has been historically something that was based on sex, and feminism fought for sex-based rights. It didn't fight for this like identity categorization. It fought for sex-based rights. So the group of women was much stricter in that it literally it was assumed to mean people who were female sex. And now, we do have intersectional feminism. We have, fourth wave feminism, even third wave feminism to some extent, approached this a little bit better. And now that category is broader. But that's the critique that I hear a lot of times is, well, feminism fights for sex-based rights. And when we talk about women, we mean females. That's a critique that I've heard a lot. So how do you fit that into your definition of gender, and how do you fit that into your way of fighting, for feminism? Because like there's reasons that I hear that critique, and the reason that I hear that critique is like we have to have a reason for what we're fighting against oppression, and this oppression is based on multiple different things. But one of those realities of oppression is that women are oppressed by a patriarchal society, and that patriarchal society is largely male, and that oppressed group is largely female. So that when we abstract it away to just saying women, then it makes it really hard to talk about what we're actually talking about. We're talking about like patriarchal oppression, and that affects trans women, but that critique seems to push back against that concept.
Wait, can you say that again in terms of what the question is related to that?
Yeah. So how do you push back against people who define gender in that sex-based way?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, it's the whole point of like what happened in third wave feminism was a pushback against essentialism. Just because you have sexed organs doesn't mean that the experiences of a woman in the Middle East are the same as the experiences of a woman in Australia. Certainly, that oppression may be based in some way on the imaginary or perceived bodily organs, because I think that when a trans person is discriminated against, there is the intersection of that being in one part because they are trans, but they can also be discriminated against because they are perceived as having the bodily functions of a cis woman or a cis man. So I think that it separates from sex because perception, it's this idea of sign versus reality. What is signified is woman, and to me, if you are experiencing oppression on the fact that you are perceived to an extent as being woman, then that is the same oppression, and you should be included in that fight. And in fact, I personally, within my praxis, base all feminist advocacy around the person who is experiencing the most oppression and is in the most danger. I think that person has to be at the front of the movement.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good, and that's essentially my critique most of the time as well. I think the only trap that we fall into there is, the concept of like a trans woman who's non-passing or a trans man who's non-passing. That becomes a problem in that type of definitioning, where so now they're having the social experience maybe of the wrong gender for them. Maybe they're having the social experience and being seen as the wrong gender, and that affects their experience and the way that they are being oppressed. Anyway.
Okay, wait. I want to ask you though, because I have a question on that. So let's get your definition of gender. Like, what is your definition of gender, so I can come back to that?
Right. Okay. So gender has multiple components. So we have a social concept of gender. We have like what you are assumed by the rest of society to be. So like you're absolutely going to be assumed most of the time to be female and be a woman. And then for me, that experience is somewhat similar. A lot of the time, I'm assumed to be female and assumed to be a woman. But if I don't pass, then I am maybe seen as presenting femininely, but seen as male. So that affects the social perception, and that's one part of it. That social perception informs expectations of you. That's the second part. So roles and roles, stereotypes, traits that we associate to those gendered categories. And then the third thing is disidentification or identification with the socially perceived sense of gender. So those three pieces all intersect together. So for me, the perception piece, it makes me uncomfortable to be perceived as a man, but it's not because I'm being perceived as a man, it's because I'm being perceived as male. And I don't necessarily want to be perceived, how do I put it? I don't want to be put into a box. I don't want to have to be seen in society as fitting this category. Because let's say that I present somewhat masculinely. If I'm perceived masculinely, then I am put into the box man. I don't really have a choice, right? And that's for me the important piece, is that gender is not just something that you feel internally. It's not just something that you identify with. It's also something that's forced onto you by society.
Mm-hmm.
If I wanted to disidentify with it, I can't. Society's going to force it onto me right now.
And I think that's something really interesting that isn't communicated well when people talk about gender performativity, right? Because it makes it sound like, oh, we wake up and we choose what gender we are and we put it on because it's a performance, like acting. When actually that performance takes place within a gendered matrix, you can't escape gender. You're already in it. So there's no way to just like, you're not this non-gendered being that then goes, what will I be today? I think I'll be a woman. No, you exist within a matrix of gender from the get-go. So my question on that is, if you experience harm from being misgendered, doesn't taking away categories of gender increase the potential for harm for you?
So there's the interesting one. So my dysphoria is mostly on the, am I being perceived as male? And the only indicator I have of am I being perceived as male is, are people thinking of me as a man? Are people saying he, him? Are people assuming that I'm male? Am I getting sir? I'm getting, and it's purely because society strongly links sex and gender. So the presumed sex that I am is what gender society sees me as. If we have a binary system, we don't have anything outside that binary right now, even though we have people who are non-binary. Society itself as a whole right now is going to put me into one of the two boxes. So those two boxes are going to be based on sex. And when I'm placed into the man box, I'm being seen as male. So in a post-gender society, I'm not going to be being, it's not even that I'm not going to be perceived as male or female, or because those categories are still going to exist, right? Sex is still a thing. It's that we don't have those boxes. We don't force people into those boxes.
And this is where I get confused. Because so I'm for the proliferation of gender, for instance. I'm for creating hundreds more gender categories. I'm also for the conceptual engineering of what woman and man is, to be more expansive or to change, what we think of it as. If you can't get rid of the categories of sex, which I have said to you before, I know this is a point we disagree on. For me, sex is not real either, to the extent that it's based on something that is like, I'm a critical realist. This is a real body. I know that I have a cis female body, right? But what I'm saying is science is the reason we have a binary, because I'm sure we could have divided human bodies in other ways, in more ways. We could have used different science to categorize bodies. The strict binary is shown not to be true just by the existence of intersex people and the bimodal understanding of sex. So my question is, I understand that most people fit within a gender binary, within a sex binary when it comes to sex. but we also know that sex is bimodal, not binary. And so I'm saying that the scientists who created the sex binary, that was a choice to do so. So for me, I like to destabilize sex as a concept, not because I'm saying that our sex organs aren't real or our hormone levels aren't real, but to me, the distinction into a binary was a social decision made by scientists.
So the reason that distinction was made, and it wasn't made by scientists. So that's the important thing, is it was not made by scientists. This is a social effect, and it's not a scientific effect. So the reason that social effect exists is because humans are really good at categorizing. And human sex may be bimodal, but bimodal just means that there's two peaks. It just means that there's some traits, and those traits are more commonly seen in males or more commonly seen in females, and they overlap a little bit. So they're not a strict binary, like face shape, for instance. So like our face shapes are actually relatively similar, even though mine is physiologically male technically and yours is physiologically female. But our face shape overlaps enough that it's kind of a pretty, close overlap. And that's what bimodal means. Bimodal doesn't mean it's not a binary. Bimodal means there's two peaks. That's all it implies. And the thing about that is humans categorize. So when we look at somebody and we say that person's female, that person's male, we can do that almost instantly, very easily, and we do it naturally. And the reason we do it is because the effects of female development and the effects of male development as a whole, overall, put themselves into two categories, two binary categories. Even though the traits are bimodal, the categories are not.
And all I'm saying to that is, if you're looking to abolish the concept of gender, which is very structurally linked to sex, and if you're not going to get rid of sex as a category of binary categories of understanding, how do you do that? How do you get people to stop identifying gender full stop?
Yeah.
When you're going to identify sex?
It's a good question. And the answer is, so if we treat sex as a medical categorization or something similar, something that is not a daily conversational topic, and we encourage societally, further gender nonconformity, I think we're going to pretty naturally start blending more towards well, I don't actually know what sex that person is. I'm not 100% sure. Because presentation is a large part of how we gender people, there's lots of things that mix in here. And it's okay. I think for me, the thing that meant the most to me that you've said is like that there's some things that you like and that you identify well with and that you like out of the category woman, but you don't have to stop liking those things. Like even in a post-gender society, and that can be something that's long-term, right? That's important too. That can be long-term. We can just talk about post-gender, and we could be talking about just literally stopping the hierarchical nature of our society.
Okay, but then this is the sticking point. This is where because my point is not that, I like these bits of gender, therefore I don't want gender to be abolished, right? My point is there are aspects of gender that I believe exist outside of oppression. So when you define gender as the group that is subordinated within a hierarchical system, then to me, if I say there are parts of gender which don't relate to subordination and oppression, that means the target gender is the wrong target, because you're actually looking at abolishing the relations that are built around gender, which can be done without getting rid of the categories of gender.
But what benefit do those categories give if we blur them enough that there are no actual distinctions? So I guess that's kind of my point here, is you're saying there's some things that are like positive about these categorizations, but then you're also saying that there's things that are outside of the context of oppression that maybe. So for instance, actually, maybe you can give me the example. Can you list something that's outside of that category of oppression but is still associated to women?
Man, I should have prepared.
No, don't worry. I have some ideas.
But yeah, I don't, it's just, it's even like, this is why I wanted to talk about gender euphoria, because I feel like my gender is a real, I don't know if you don't want to talk about that. I'm just interested in your perception.
Oh, we can talk about it. So here's my problem though. I don't feel gender euphoria. I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't really know what euphoria feels like. So dysphoria for me was a discomfort with the sexual characteristics that I have of male sex. And the way to help dysphoria was take hormones, and the reason that like social transition helped me is that, again, that link is very strong between sex and gender, and society seeing me as a female makes me feel a lot better about myself. It makes me feel like I'm not looking male. So that part of things is what I cared about. I don't necessarily feel or identify as a woman. I don't have that level of like identification with gender. I internally don't feel like anything. I feel like Alice. I feel like me.
Yeah.
I don't identify with the gendered things that people place on me. Like I'm like, for instance, the things that get pushed upon me are that I should be socially submissive, that I should maybe I'm allowed to wear dresses, or maybe I should be presenting femininely because that's what women do, or there's things that are forced upon me. And that is not even if it's not something that's necessarily oppressing me, like the fact of being able to wear a dress, that's not oppression. I can wear a dress, and that's not, I don't have to, right? I can wear other things, and you've seen me on here. I wear ridiculous stuff all the time. Like I don't feel like I have to necessarily be forced into wearing a dress or presenting femininely. But on the other hand, if I present masculinely enough, then society is going to see me as male and see me as a man and put me back in that box. So I'm not actually choosing this. And that's what I mean. Yeah, there's things, and I agree with you.
That.
Yeah,
I just think it's shit, right? Because like any example, like, so for me, and I feel like the regressive one in this conversation, but like for me, there are aspects of being a woman that I feel are core to my identity. I don't even know how to express them because it's not wearing a dress, or like I'm wearing sweatpants and a jumper at the moment. Like I'm not, but like it's not necessarily how I dress, or it's not like doing my makeup or wearing high heels, but there's something in terms of the performance, the things that I do that are very feminine. It's not even enjoyable. It's just who I am. And I can't tell you that is a choice, because as we've spoken about, there's no existence outside the gendered matrix. So I've never experienced not doing that. But it is annoying to me to have a core part of my identity constantly framed as oppression, when that's not always what I'm experiencing in terms of how it is effectively felt. And there are aspects maybe that, sure, it's not a choice, but I do have choice. It will be received differently, perhaps. I mean, like, and it's different for me as well, because just naturally I'm hyper feminine presenting. So like, I don't have the experience where if I, go down to the store in an oversized tee with no makeup on it, like I'm never going to be mistaken for anything other than my gender. So, or sex. So it's a very different experience, and it's actually so core to my entire lived experience. It's very hard for me to distinguish my identity outside of my gender. So to feel like every bit of that is oppressive is like, well, that hasn't been my experience.
I don't mean to put, maybe I'm misspeaking here. I don't think that everything about the category woman is oppressive, because it's not. Of course it's not. But I do think that almost everything about the category woman is socially assigned, except for the sex part of things. And even the sex part of things, like you've pointed out, is socially assigned. So you are identifying with a socially assigned set of categorizations, and there's traits that you like about it. And that's good, but that doesn't mean they're not being pushed upon you and societally forced upon you. It doesn't mean that you're being oppressed by it, but it does mean that you didn't necessarily choose these things. Like you just said, hyperfeminine, that's not something you decided was hyperfeminine. It's that societally, it's thought of as hyperfeminine.
My question to that then is, right, as you mentioned, we can't escape categorization and concepts. That's what our brain naturally does in order to survive.
Yes.
We create a concept which we put a whole lot of information in so that we can save our cognitive economy and save time when we're dealing with stimuli. So concepts are always going to exist. Why should we abolish gendered concepts instead of trying to ameliorate them and engineer them into something that isn't linked to social oppression?
Because so let's say we go down that route. And we say we start trying to remove some of the things about gender that are socially like forced upon people. Okay, so let's start with presentation. Men can wear whatever they want. Women can wear whatever they want. Okay, they can present however they want. Men can wear makeup now. Okay, and let's just keep going. And as we keep going, we're beginning to blur the lines between men and women naturally. And believe me, I support that. Let's keep doing that. Let's keep blurring those lines. But we get to a point where you stop being able to say, that's a man, that's a woman, because the presentation is so blended that you just don't know anymore. And at that point, you don't have categories that matter. So the only way to keep the categories, if we were to go down that route, would be to say, actually, you know what? We went too far. Let's go back. Men have to wear, men can't wear dresses. Women have to wear dresses or whatever, So when we start taking away some of those pieces, when we start saying, well, actually, you know what? Don't worry, men. You can wear makeup, and don't worry, women. You can present masculinely. Women are absolutely allowed to be like socially aggressive, and men are absolutely allowed to cry. These are all good. I want all of these things. But as we keep doing these things and taking away the pieces of gender, and we start mixing them, I want that to happen, but I want that to happen because that will naturally get to where I want society to be, where being a man or being a woman doesn't actually define anything about you. It doesn't tell you anything. That's where I want to be. But that's what confuses me about your position, is you've basically just supported my position, but said you also like being able to identify with women, but you also want other people to not have to. So it's a very interesting position that you have, because you're basically saying, I like this category and I want to still be able to identify with it, but I also don't want it to be oppressive to people. So I want other people to be able to disidentify with pieces of it whenever they want. At that point, you don't have a category anymore.
I think the difference is maybe because I think ultimately we're very close in position. I'm not for absolute abolition. I believe that anyone has the right to identify however they want, and that includes as a woman or as a man. And so for me, the personal choice is different from the social reality, in that I feel like the goals of abolition don't align with the goals of abolition. So like, I don't believe that getting rid of these categories actually aligns with what you say that you want, because I think if it's oppression that's the problem, just getting rid of the concepts of gender won't achieve that. And I think there's more to the identities of gender than just presentation and what you're wearing. I think to I understand why you're saying it like that, because it illustrates your point, but I think it also is reductive to the point that like there's a lot that gender meaningfully does outside of just presentation, in terms of just advocacy generally, how we understand, like, you could argue sex, but I'm saying things like domestic violence, homelessness, things we use it as an aggregate. Yeah, but it's not all based on sex, because we include it's about social interactions with that.
Yeah, but
if you say it's based on sex, then you're back at my point, which is there's no meaningful distinction between sex and gender, and neither are real. And if that's the case, then why abolish gender and not sex?
Okay, so let's do that. Let's do it that way. It becomes the same result. So I don't disagree with you. It's just that we end up in the same position at the same result regardless. We change how we talk about it. And I agree with you. I also think that maybe you're hearing gender abolition and you're thinking that I'm going to make it so that nobody can say they're a man, nobody can say they're a woman, nobody can use pronouns. We're going to live in a society where everybody is, I would honestly like if we stopped using gendered pronouns. That would probably be pretty helpful, but I don't think that's necessarily going to happen. What I would prefer, what the route that I would say is, let's start breaking down these categories, whether we think about it as sex or gender, I don't care. Let's start breaking down the categories and blending them out so that we no longer can easily just make a distinction, a strict distinction of man and woman. Start blending out the categories. Start blending out the sex categories. That's fine with me. Let's start blending out sex. Oh, well, it actually turns out you're not necessarily female or male. Maybe there's some sort of spectrum along here, and you don't necessarily get assigned female or male at birth. You get assigned something else along a spectrum. Oh, yeah, you're actually you're an 8. Or you're an 8, or you're a 0, right? And they're somewhere along that spectrum or something like that. But regardless of how we do it, we end up in the same result. We end up with categories that get blended out and are no longer meaningful, and you can identify with it, but it means nothing for you to identify. I want it to be to a point where people say, I'm a woman, and I say, okay, but like, what do you like? Or like what's your like subculture? Like, I don't want to know anything about that person when they say they're a woman. I don't want to be able to say anything about that person.
And I know this is such a lame point, but it is something that's important to me, because in the same way that when I say, oh, I'm a prison abolitionist or I'm a police abolitionist, and people are like, why do you have to say abolish the police? Why can't you say defund the police? The reason that I say no, I say abolish the police, because that is my true desire. I want to abolish that, right? So for me, what I hear when you say that is you want to abolish gender roles, not gender. So I know that's a semantic point, but I think it is different because it comes back to what I'm saying is that gender constitutes more than oppression and social sort of roles that are pushed onto genders.
What else does it I think
I
that's why.
don't know.
Yeah, you haven't been able to show me that. I want to see
Yeah.
that position because I've actually so disclaimer, I'm not saying this is you at all, but I've talked to people like you who have a like a regressive and traditional view of gender, and they talk in a lot of the same ways, but they don't talk the same way as you because what they actually end up caring about is they care about, well, we need society to have strong men and home, you're not talking like that. So I find it really interesting that you identify with this concept, but then you also say, yeah, but I actually don't want it to mean these things. So what does it actually mean to you? That's what I don't understand. What are the good things for you? What are the things that you're talking about that are not social presentation, that are not roles or traits? What are the positives about being a woman for you? What are those things? Put me in your shoes.
I'm not doing a good job of explaining it. I acknowledge that, but I really am trying to tell you that, like, I can't necessarily, if we believe that gender is a matrix within which we exist before we're even born, like there's no outside of the gender matrix, sure. And that, I mean, maybe you had the argument that gender necessarily relates to power. So when you take a gender role, then obviously everything you're doing is either being decided for you or you're like, I can't distinguish for you what is a choice, because I think it's the wrong language to begin with, because none of us ever have a choice, right? But that means that any choice that anything that I do that is gendered female, you're gonna, or woman, you're gonna come back and say, well, you're not choosing to do that. That's being chosen for you, right? Even though I'm saying these are core aspects of my identity, which I don't find oppressive and I don't effectively feel are oppressive to me, and I enjoy them. So I don't, and it's annoying when things that, when you don't have a choice because the gendered matrix is so expansive, and then you're told that anything that you do enjoy is naturally a result of an oppressive hierarchical system that you had no choice in. I can't hear you.
Is that good?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. So I think the problem for me is that, so first off, I hear you and I appreciate that. And I think that's one of the hardest things about talking about this type of thing. And I don't mind if we don't call it gender abolition. We can call it whatever you want to call it. Doesn't matter. Gender.
But then we're going to agree, because I'm actually not far away from the abolitionist movement. I don't believe that gender in its current form should continue to exist. I don't believe social hierarchies based around gender should exist. I don't believe social roles that are oppressive and necessary determinants of gender should exist. I think there can be conceptual engineering that is done to change the roles of gender. I think we can proliferate gender so that there are many different kinds of gender, which may be the end point of gender abolition for you. But I don't think, just as you say that my points are sometimes used by hideous people that I am not aligned with in any way, when I talk to other gender abolitionists, they don't necessarily have the same viewpoint as you, of like, yeah, conceptual engineering is fine and we can proliferate gender. They're like, no, get rid of gender.
No.
And so
maybe I need to find a better word. It's not going to be gender ascensionist, I promise. But no, so I think the problem for me, and actually I think that you bring up an interesting point, like, okay, let's just add more categories. And even though adding more categories maybe could get us to the point where I want to be, I don't really think it would, because essentially society categorizes. And society categorizes right now based on sex. And if I pass, then I'm categorized as female and categorized as a woman. And if I don't pass, I'm categorized as male and categorized as a man. And even if I want to disidentify with that system right now, I can't. Like I could pick another gender, right? I could say I'm demi-male, or I could say I'm demi-female, or I could say that I'm just non-binary. I could say all these things, and it would be irrelevant. Society would still see me the way that society sees me, because the general zeitgeist is that man and woman exist, and they are female and male, and it's as simple as that. And so I went, and also just to address, yes, there's some people who are really, really, really odd about gender abolition. Gender abolition has such a long history. There's been so many different types of gender abolition. So early gender abolition, what they actually meant was break down the hierarchy entirely, make it so that there's no hierarchy here. And that's what gender abolition originally meant. It didn't mean break the categories down. It meant kill the hierarchy. I mean, we're going to make it so there's no hierarchy. That's how feminism has progressed, right? Gender abolition was a feminist viewpoint. And then we started getting into more, and this is not to you necessarily, Joe, because I know you know a lot of this history and you know these things, but our audience may not know some of the history.
It's good for the audience. Go for it.
The next step in gender abolition was, okay, so maybe it's not actually enough to break this hierarchy down. Maybe we need to separate off, or maybe we need to break these categories down entirely. And we start having that type of thing where we start saying, well, okay, if there's ever any categorization between male and female, then we're just going to end up in the same system again, and there's just going to be oppression. So we need to break that system down entirely and say that there can't be categorization. So you get like Firestone, who's essentially who I'm basing a lot of my praxis on, and Firestone essentially posited that, like, if we remove this distinction of like females bearing children and males, like, you know, providing for a household, if we break that distinction down, then we don't have to worry about this anymore. We're not going to have categories. We're going to be in a post-gender society. And, you know, external wombs, and those other things. Those are the types of things that started getting talked about. And that's breaking down the sex, you know, binary, essentially. That could be positive. And that, but if we do that, if we break down that sex binary, then we naturally end up in this position where I don't see a possibility for you to identify with women and have that mean something other than maybe to you personally, which is okay. Yeah. It's good for it to mean something to you personally. Yeah.
I think, and that's sort of my issue too with gender abolition, is that, like, I think it might mean something nice for me personally and not mean anything to anyone else, right? This is sort of my argument normally against. I think it's shit to exclude trans women from the category of woman if that's something they identify with. I think abolition can have the unintended goal of accidentally causing more misgendering and excluding people because they feel that their identity is something and they no longer have access to that.
Which is why it's a long-term goal. So so this is not something that is necessarily finger snap and there's no more gender. So it's a long-term goal, and which is why we align so well, by the way, is that your position naturally leads to my position. My position's just 100 years in the future and yours is 10. So along the way, I need to get to where you are. That's part of the process.
I have a question. So something you said in relation to proliferating gender categories, you said that doesn't matter because that's still like, I'm not saying what you said in a negative way. I'm just saying it in a really condensed way. That doesn't matter because ultimately people are still going to look at me and put me into one of the binary categories. Is that not true of gender abolition too? How do you get to that point?
Right, because you start blending the categories. So, which is why, again, so right now, how do I describe it? We need to do something that's a mixture between the two of us. And the mixture between the two of us is that we have to get to something where we can say, hey, this is the next change that needs to happen. And maybe that's, you know, beginning to start breaking down this hierarchy that we do have right now, and starting to blend out the social, you know, traits and roles that we associate to man and woman. And as we start blending those things out, we're going to naturally lead to a position where you no longer are being expected. You know, you don't have these expectations anymore. So maybe you're still going to identify with woman, but your identification with woman doesn't mean that people are assuming that you're socially submissive and that you're going to have long hair and that you're going to. So there's like things that we associate societally. So my position is essentially that we should start building out society so we don't associate those things to man and woman, so that we don't associate social submissiveness to women and social aggressiveness to men, and start breaking down those things. And
I completely agree.
Yeah, I'm not surprised because people hear gender abolition and they're like, you want to destroy all the genders. And some people who say gender abolition is what they want. Yeah, that is what they want. They want to destroy all the genders now, and they're going to make it so that they're going to put you in the gulag if you say you're a woman. But that's not what I'm talking about. You and I are talking about the same thing, just in a different way.
I would agree. I would agree with abolition, just not absolute abolition. I think that's where I really draw the line. I don't like absolute abolition. I find it difficult as well when it's like, oh, you can keep your genders, but so like Firestone and Haslanger both present their understanding of gender as something defined as the subjugated person in a hierarchical system. So I don't understand how you can say keep your gender category, but then also define gender purely through oppression. So to me, that doesn't fit.
What does oppression mean to you?
Well, I'm not using this is the problem when you start like studying stuff. I don't even necessarily agree with this point of view. Oppression to me in this case means actions that work to keep you in the subjugated position within a dominance hierarchical structure. So gender oppression in this instance means that the woman, like the category of woman, is defined and policed in such a way that their actions ensure that they remain in the submissive position within a gender dominant hierarchy.
Right. So obviously not all, well, I shouldn't say obviously because maybe it's not to some people, but there are definitely traits about a man or a woman that don't enforce that sort of hierarchical role. I agree with you there. So but I think the thing for me is that you might not feel oppressed by the role that you're being put in by society. But I do. So and other so because I'm trans, those types of things I have to question them really heavily because I am somebody who is one of the trashy people that we've talked about. Suggested this concept of like a guest in womanhood, and I actually think that that's a helpful way for me to think about it because in a lot of ways, even though I'm having the social experience of a woman right now, my experience is like fundamentally a little bit different. You and I have fundamental differences. You were raised as a woman and you never had to question it. And like you said, if you dress in an oversized t-shirt and something, you're still going to be thought of as women. That's not true for me. So my experience is different enough that I do need to remember and I need to listen to people who have always had this identification and always been in this class. And that matters. That actually can help inform some worldviews. So I've talked to people who were assigned female at birth and still identify with that. And other people who were assigned female at birth and still identify with women have expressed some of the same feelings that I have. So that women is a class that is applied to them that is oppressive to them, even if it's not the hierarchical oppression. It's the roles, traits, and expectations that are put onto them. Even if it's not about the hierarchy, it's about the stereotyping and traits. But
I would argue that all of that is done in order to keep the hierarchy in place. And when I tell you that there are parts of my gender identity that I love and feel very connected to and don't find oppressive, that's not to say that I don't find being viewed as a woman and having the gender of woman completely not oppressive. I mean, like, I talk about it all the time. It doesn't, I am like, just to like, not big note myself for a second, I'm fucking brilliant. And yet the amount of times that people view me as not intellectual because I look a certain way is out of control.
All I wanted to say is like, so there's a good example. So I am in a very technical field. I am in a technical field, and in my company, I have probably absolutely the most knowledge on this field in my company. I have how do I describe it? We have an engineering department. The engineering department has development experience. I am equal to the engineering department people, and that knowledge was not questioned before transition, and then I transitioned, and then people started seeing me as a woman, and that was really good for me, right? Except then they also started seeing me as a woman, and they started questioning everything that I did. And they started questioning every answer I gave. Even though I literally am the person that wrote some of this stuff in the department that I was in, they started questioning everything about it. I had multiple times where somebody responded to something that I said, and they linked an article, and they're like, no, this contradicts you. And it was an article I wrote. So those are the things that those are an example of like an oppressive societal like construct that is applied to women. And like, I want to break that shit down. I don't want that to happen to people.
Neither, but I don't think that should be. I don't think that those social practices are entirely constituted. See, look, I'm a genius. See what I'm saying? I don't think those social practices create the entirety of what it means to be a woman. Just as you said, you have different experiences to me. The women you've spoken to have different experiences to me. I spend a lot of time in lesbian circles. My friends who are extremely butch have very different experiences to me. I used to live in the Middle East. My friends who get up every day and put on a shayla and a baya, they have different experiences to me. Like, there's nothing essential about the category of woman. To me, it is an ungrounded ground that we use to to push forward for teleological purposes. Maybe that's why for me it's so malleable. And I also acknowledge, as much as everyone thinks I'm an idiot all the time, that there are instances where I can push back on someone a little more than a man can because it doesn't look aggressive, or I get called on because, and that might just be like a pretty privilege as well, because I am just empirically not unattractive. So like people will take my questions more promptly and often than they take other people's questions, and I get these privileges. And I wouldn't say, maybe that is still part of this matrix of oppression, but I don't experience personal oppression on an individual interpersonal level because of these things. I probably do. You could, yeah.
But we don't even. So for me, I think that's the important thing, is that this is not about individuals. This is about a classification and an entire society. So when we look at an individual level, it's just meaningless. So like our individual experiences matter, but when we talk about this type of thing, we're talking about the entire group. And so, and which is fine. I actually want to table that for a second because I want to think about something else. I have a concern, and this is the biggest concern actually that I have with your position right now. And your position is that that there's, you mentioned some shared experiences between women, but here's my problem: is if we keep going as we are going right now, the shared experience is being female, or being presumed to be female. And that's my problem, is that a lot of the things that you just talked about and about your experience are about the experience of being presumed to be female. And I agree with you on that. I think that you're right. But I think that if we continue down that path of being presumed to be female, then we're going to create this like dichotomy of like, okay, so if you're trans, you're only actually in the category of woman if you're presumed to be female sex. And there's no real way to talk about it otherwise, because the positives that you associate to your gender are actually going to just be related to your sex, your assumed sex. So that's my problem with your position right now, is just like, I agree with you. You're right now, descriptively rather, you're right. But prescriptively, I'm saying we have to demolish that, or we're going to fuck over some group. And that's okay if you want to say that, but most people I talk to don't want to say that. And my position, I even agree with you, by the way, like, I think that is the shared experience right now of women is being presumed to be female. If I were on this panel talking like this, I'd have a different experience.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what my point is that there's things that we physiologically assume to be female, and those things are what we currently actually mean by women. Even if in what you're talking about, everything you've said actually means physiologically or assumed to be female. That's the group that you're talking about.
How do we get to a point of abolishing that, so long as reproductive systems still exist in their current form?
Do you want to? So I think that's my question is, do you want to bite that bullet and say that to be a woman means to be presumed to be female by society?
Well, that's not what I want. That's not what I think that might be correct. I think in terms of,
Descriptively correct, audience.
Descriptively correct. I think like in terms of what I use the category of woman for in terms of my work and research, that's not how I understand woman. I definitely include people who do not pass as female, but in terms of the privileges that I was just putting forward, certainly when you call out that they are connected to being perceived female, certainly 100% I agree with that. But that's why, like, damn, I wish you had gender euphoria, because
I don't.
I
I'm
think
so sorry.
yeah, I know, it's okay, that's okay. But I mean, like, I wonder if there are trans women who experience joy from their identification with the concept of women.
Yes, there are.
In which case, what is that like, and how is that not oppressive? Because I mean, that's the TERF argument, isn't it? The whole like, oh, you love being a woman because you like pretending to be a woman and using stereotypes, and you're actually oppressing women by saying that you love being a woman. Like, that's not what I don't think that's true of women who feel gender euphoria at all. Like, I categorically disagree with that.
Yeah, no, same. So the question for me becomes, we're talking descriptively right now. To be a woman means to be presumed to be female. How do we stop that? And that's why my position is essentially abolition. Maybe it's not total gender abolition, but we need to break that concept down further than it is. And we're not going to break that concept down further just by adding more genders, woman is always going to mean presumed to be female. And I know that's not necessarily your position. I know, and I'm sorry if anyone thinks that
No,
that's what I'm saying.
it's
But
good to. I mean, I said it. So if you were to assume that is my position, that would make total sense. I'm less for the the idea of like proliferation of genders than I am for like conceptual engineering and attacking the social sort of stereotyping and roles that are pushed on these categories than I am for like, oh, let's just get rid of the concepts altogether.
So here's my question for you, and this is, I think, maybe this will help. Maybe this will help. So,
If I can answer it.
well, but it's okay if you can't. This isn't a debate. This is literally, I wanted to learn about your position, and you wanted to learn about mine, and I feel like we're, doing that. So this is perfect. So my question is, I guess I have two questions. So right now, descriptively, to be a woman in society means to be presumed to be female, and to be a man means presumed to be male. That's what it means right now. Even if there's some people who break that mold, that's still what society thinks in that context. The question becomes, so if we remove that, if we make it so that it's not a matter of what sex you're presumed to be, then what is it? What is the shared characteristic that makes a woman then? And what's the shared characteristic that makes a man? So can you answer that?
The most infuriating answer of all time, right?
Okay.
So when Irigare was asked, what does it mean to be a woman? She laughed. And for me, that is what I want. So it's not about producing meaning. The categories operate in order to do something rather than to be something. So for me, it's doing without knowing. It's something that you can sort of play with and perform without necessarily having it being constitutive of anything. Why? You think I would know how to say that word? How often I want to use it, without it actually representing a core base of meaning of anything. So Linda Zarelli is my favorite academic, and she is the big proponent of this. It's this idea of being able to do things on behalf of women, as a woman, identifying as a woman, without ever having a clear concept of what that actually means.
Right. And I don't mind that because it just plays into my hand. So that's fine.
I don't think we disagree. We just
No.
disagree. Like, I thought your position was maybe it's because of the makeup of the panel and who else was arguing different positions. But like most of the time, when I come up against gender abolition, particularly in academic spaces, it means like complete abolition of the concepts of gender and the categories of gender. And I think that is misplacing the target, because I don't think the gender concepts are the problem. I think they can be amelioratively I think we can do conceptual engineering to make them work better and still have them and play with them, because I ultimately, the same as you, I think people are going to categorize. They're going to do it. So it's like,
yeah, I think here's my problem is, let's say we do this conceptual engineering and we change that definition. We say women is this like category that you can identify with, and it doesn't have a clear definition necessarily. It's just a category you can identify with. So that means that category is now meaningless. If anyone can identify with the category, it's no longer actually a categorization. So if we get to that point, then we're literally just going to be in the same spot. We're going to be at a position where people say female, male, or something like that. And so my suggestion would be something else entirely different. So start identifying with a subculture. Start identifying, categorize based on something else. Like, humans need to categorize, but why not categorize on something else? Why categorize on sex?
How do you feel about this? Okay. So for me, meaning is produced in context. So it's like, depending on what I'm trying to do, right? So, and this is true of how I currently look at gender, right? Because if I'm looking at gender and I'm trying to argue against something like FGM, then yeah, I'm going to have a more sex-based understanding of what gender is than I am if I'm looking at, like, if I'm doing a review of Judith Butler's work and how it relates to the changing queer movement and queer identities. Like, my understanding of gender is going to be substantially different. The meaning of the categories are dependent on the context in which they're used and the goals which they seek to achieve.
Yes, but then we get into the turf arguments of, well, why would we bother redefining this category to make it harder for us to talk about the category? Why not just make the category consistent and always have it refer to female?
Because that is essentialist, and not every woman has the same experience. To me, it's not about, it's the meaning relates to what you want to do with it, and you're going to want to do different things on behalf of women in different places, and you need a different understanding in order to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes it makes sense just to not say woman and say female. Like,
Yeah.
there are times where you're literally talking about something that only affects females and does not
Yeah.
affect people who may be women but are male.
Well, I had this problem even so in my PhD, I'm looking at women leaders of governments, right? And there's a girl in my faculty who looks at how non-binary identities and trans identities work in institutions and interact with leadership. And she said to me, "Well, you haven't made space for trans women or non-binary people in your study." And I'm like, there haven't been any trans or non-binary world leaders. Like, it's not that I am doing it in order to exclude people. It's because I have no data to examine. So I don't. It annoys me sometimes that it's like we can't say female when we mean female, and we can't use like. I think sometimes the sensitivity around this topic means that we don't express ourselves in a meaningful way.
Yeah. No, but that's the problem though, is that right now societally, or not even societally, just in general, the internet, when you say female, then people are like, it's a turf. No, sometimes we need to talk about the sex categorization of female, and sometimes we need to talk about the sex categorization of male. You don't need to worry about prostate cancer if you're female. So there's like things that do actually depend on sex and just sex. Now, I think there's some interesting things here because like I actually don't share a lot of the things that males share. Most males don't have breasts. Most males don't have to worry about having, high risk of breast cancer. Most males don't have estrogen. Most male, there's like so it's also not really fair to say that we should like separate into male female necessarily. It's not even as clear as that. But there's going to be times where we do need to talk about female, male, trans female, trans male. There's like we have to talk about that sometimes. We have to be able to talk about that and know that we're talking about sex, the category sex. We're not talking about your gender. We're talking about sex. And sometimes that is important. And it's really hard to talk about that, to be honest with you. So like, I don't know. It just gets so difficult. The whole thing gets difficult.
And this is it. Like, this is what I mean in terms of the complication of like even, and I started to speak about this a little in the last panel, right? The separation between gender and sex created this new monolith where now it's like, it's difficult to talk about sex because there are also things in the medical community that are gendered and do relate to gender, not sex. But the second that it's medical, it's like, oh, it's female. And it's like, well, it's not quite that clear cut either. There are places where sex and gender overlap. And and this is where we get into like turf arguments again, where people say that there is discrimination that is both based on sex and gender.
Which there seems to be. Yeah.
But unfortunately, you don't have to hate trans women to fight for those things.
And how do you the question becomes, how do you talk about that? Because like so there's some experiences that like there's some experiences that you have as a woman that you only have when you are presumed to be female, and there's some experiences that you have as a woman that just happen based on identifying with the categorization woman or being in the categorization woman. It's like it's hard to talk about that too, because like there's going to be differences in the experience of somebody who is presumed to be female, presenting and societally being seen as female and fitting in that box woman. Like somebody who presents like more butch, they're going to have a different experience, and it's going to inform their experience a lot. And we can't talk about that very easily. Again, these categorizations just become meaningless as we blend them, which is why my position is that we should keep blending them. We should keep blending out those categories until we get to the point where you no longer know something about somebody because they say they're a woman. You don't know that they're necessarily female. You don't know necessarily that they like, playing with dolls or something. And we already don't know that, right? Like you already don't actually know that. You just are going to associate those things. And I'm saying, let's break that association down. Really, really break it down.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. But do you understand what I'm saying when I say there can still be a great use of gendered concepts within the context? So we can break down any social assumption about girls playing with dolls and boys playing with trucks and all of that stuff. And I can still operationally use the concept of woman in advocacy to mean whatever I mean in the context of what I'm talking about. So do you understand what I'm saying? Like you almost need the category in order, and well, not the category. You need the concept in order to change to achieve what you're trying to achieve.
Yes. Yeah, you do right now, which is why this is something that's very long term, which is why I said mine is 100 years in the future and yours is 10. And that's my point, is that, like, yeah, I agree with you. Right now we need categorization to be able to talk about that. The categorization exists, but that's descriptive. So prescriptively, I'm saying we don't want to necessarily have to keep those categories. You can like the things you like without having to say, well, I like this because I'm a woman. You can just say, I like presenting this way. This is how I present, and I like it. And that can be fine. That can be really, really good. That can be really freeing to be able to say, I like how I present. I like how I'm seen. I like being pretty and wearing things that make me feel pretty. And those can be really great things. And I'm just, that's an example. That's not necessarily, but that's kind of my point, is like, you're right about that. We need the categorization right now, but that's descriptive, and that's descriptive for the next 10 years, maybe, or the next 50 years even. But my position is prescriptive. As we blend out these categories, which we both seem to agree that we should do, we should blend out the categories. As we blend them out, we're going to naturally come to the position I'm talking about. Once we blend out the category enough that you no longer get meaningful information from knowing someone's a woman, we don't have the categories anymore. There's something else that's come in there. There's something else. Now, when somebody says they're a woman, you say, okay, well, I don't actually care about that because it doesn't mean anything. So what else? What kind of music do you listen to? What do you like wearing? What do you go to school for? We start blending the category out enough, then there's no longer a category. And I'm saying, let's keep blending the category. Let's, in 100 years, not be able to differentiate because we blended the category out so much that there's nothing to talk about. Being a woman doesn't necessarily mean now that you share an experience with another woman. It no longer has meaning.
It doesn't even mean that now. I mean, it doesn't mean
well,
that
it
now
does, because it's presumed to be female.
Okay, but I don't think that in every instance that the concept of woman is used and activated, does it mean that I share an experience with some, like, there are women who fall under the category of woman that I probably share like very few experiences with. I think to suggest that we all have identical experiences is the reason that we started to destabilize the concept of woman in the first place, to avoid essentialism. I don't disagree with you. I think like I agree, but for me, I see this as conceptual engineering, not as abolition.
Well, I agree with you, but when it leads in 100 years, when it leads in 100 years to essentially the abolition of these categories that we have, then we're at the same position. You're just talking about it in the nearer term, and I'm talking about it in the longer term. And maybe I need to find a different word. I don't mind finding a different word, but my position is historically gender abolition. There's just been different types.
And I've got two questions. Well, they're not questions so much as like statements for you to respond to. So one is, obviously we need to, before we can abolish gender, you would automatically agree that gender depression needs to be taken care of because we need the concept in order to express gender depression. Do you agree or disagree?
We need to get rid of gender depression. Yes. Regardless, we need to do that. Even if we don't move towards blending the categories out, we need to stop the hierarchy that we have. Patriarchy can get fucked.
Abolish the patriarchy first.
Yes.
Then go to blending the concepts until they are abolished just through naturally dying out, atrophy. This is like more, so I wonder if we get to that point in 100 years and we have conceptually started to blend to the point that the concept is meaningless. That ineffable thing that I feel about being a woman that I'm currently describing, and that ineffable thing that many trans women describe in terms of feeling like a woman, does that still exist?
No, but it's not a bad thing. So I think that's the thing, is that right now you feel that because these categorizations exist and are not blended. So you feel that identification with the concepts that society says means woman. And when we blend that category out further, there's going to be less to identify with. So now you're going to identify with the set of concepts that you identify with right now. There's some concepts you like about women, you identify with them, and those are going to stay. You're still going to be able to identify with those concepts. But as we blend that category out, you saying you're a woman isn't going to mean the stuff that you like.
But I currently, actually don't worry about this point, because it's going to just confuse you as it confuses me, but it is truthful to my position. I don't believe that being a woman means anything. it's just something that I feel. I don't think it's constituent. Like, I don't think it's not the way that I wear my hair or the way that I giggle or anything. It's not constitutive of anything within society or how people interact with me. It's like a unessentialism. It's something that I feel. It doesn't
But
necessarily mean anything. But I
that's
understand what you're
you.
saying in response.
Yeah,
I know,
that's
I
you.
know.
You feel like
I'm not,
you.
yeah, okay. So it's not actually anything that I
It's not
identify
gender.
with.
It's you.
And solidarity with other women, I guess,
But that
is
means,
based on oppression. So without
yes,
oppression
you don't
or
have
a
that
shared
identification.
experience, I don't have that identification.
Which is what
Okay.
my point is that as we
That's
blend
a
it
good
out, and we
point.
both seem to agree there, then you're not going to have that experience. And I'm not saying necessarily that you have to prescriptively not be able to identify with other people. You're going to still have this. There's like, even as you blend those categories out for the next 50 or 100 years, there's still going to be sex-based oppression. There's still going to be oppression against trans people. There's still going to be these things that we need to talk about. So we're going to have to still talk about them. But as we blend those categories out, those types of things are going to naturally have to be moved past. We don't have a choice. If we try to move past those issues, we're gonna blend the categories. So, like, no matter how I see it, as long as we keep progressing, then we get to my position. And that's kind of what I mean, is that as long as we keep progressing, and you seem to agree that we want to keep progressing in this way, we're going to blend the categories out. We're going to stop being able to have any meaningful identification with man or woman. We're going to maybe introduce more categories. And as we keep doing that and we keep blending and we keep progressing, we're going to eventually get to the position where I'm talking about, where you saying you're a woman doesn't mean anything at all. I can't even guess anything about you based on that identification. I can't know whether you're female or male. I can't know anything. And then why in the world would you say you're a woman? Because it doesn't mean anything. You're not sharing an experience. You're not sharing an information about you. You might say, hey, you might even be able to say, I present femininely, but that doesn't mean you're a woman. It means you present femininely.
Yeah, and I think, like, I don't disagree with you at all in any sort of meaningful way. And I agree with you on goals, and I agree with you. I think the only thing I disagree with, or it's not even a disagreement, I'm not fully there with you yet, is the idea that ameliorating the categories and the concepts will inevitably lead to the reduction of oppression. I
Right.
almost feel
Well,
the opposite. Yeah,
yeah,
I feel
yeah,
like
no,
we need to reduce this kind of oppression at least at the same time, if not
yes,
before we sort of emulate. Because for me, I get super nervous, just as we had that discussion before, where you're like, we need to be able to talk about some issues as matters of sex. Like, as we start to ameliorate categories, something I'm always concerned about is like discursive injustice, like not having the language to be able to talk about experiences. And even if that language is meaningful and it's meaningless and prescriptively keeping us oppressed, if we don't, as long as a judicial system exists where we are represented in categories and as members of groups, if you take away the language to be able to talk about a group, that
yeah.
stresses me out a little. Yeah.
No, I don't think we should do that. But I do think that we're going to face a problem here, because we're going to start getting into the question and into the turf arguments of, well, now how do we talk about women when
I
we
know.
mean female sex? And that's kind of the
Yeah.
problem, is that a lot of the times what you're talking about, you mean female sex. Even if you don't want to mean it, you do mean it. And
No, I
so
know.
so it gets really
And,
difficult.
and what I'm trying to say is, like, it's difficult for me when we're talking generally, because within my work, when I use the concept of woman, the concept and what I mean by it changes depending on literally
Yeah.
what I'm working on.
Yeah.
So I never use a consistent and grounded and static understanding of gender ever. It really
Right.
depends on what I'm trying to achieve, how I define the category.
Right. Right. And I think just being more like the saying, yeah, you know what? For the next 20 years, we're going to need to deal with sex-based oppression, and we're going to have to deal with intersectional feminism. Has some really important things that we're going to need to keep using. And intersectional feminism itself addresses this. It addresses that there's multiple components of oppression, and that, being female is one. And somebody in chat says, maybe if you stop calling them turf arguments, you can engage with them. So I just to address that, like, I use it because it's descriptive of the arguments. They're trans exclusionary radical feminists. There's, the arguments lead, like, to a position. So, like, I'm not really sure what else to call them. Those arguments are pretty exclusively that set of people. And that's not not like trying to be derogatory towards that group. I'm being descriptive of the beliefs that a lot of those people have. And if you assume that I'm being like derogatory, I could use some other word, but that's the group I'm referring to. I'm not referring to just people who are transphobic. I'm referring to feminist theorists that are trans exclusionary. So I'm not describing, the people on Twitter you see who hate trans people. I'm talking about feminist theorists.
Yeah. And I need to make it clear for my own conscience. Like, I think I sometimes use arguments that sound like turf parallel, but I want to make it explicitly clear that
You're
I
not.
am in no way
No.
transphobic or trans exclusionary in my feminism.
Yeah.
Even though some of my arguments may sit on a parallel, it's not what I mean ever.
And it's the same for me. Like when you hear me talk about these things, I admit things that some people who are trans won't admit because it's scary to talk about it this
Yeah.
way. It's scary to just say, sometimes when we say women, we mean female. There's times where that's true, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that there are, like that trans women aren't women. It doesn't mean that, but it does mean that sometimes contextually, when we say women, we do mean female, and that's okay.
But
That's fine.
that's exactly what I mean in terms of like it is meaning in the context of use. Meaning is how the word is used. And so I don't believe in creating a static meaning for the concept of woman because I don't believe that meaning exists outside of the context of it being used.
Right. But then as we blend, which is what my point is I do agree with you. Women only means what we societally want it to mean. But I'm prescriptively saying we should blend it out. We should make it so that it doesn't mean a lot. And as we do that, we're going to get to the point where it means nothing anymore. And when it means nothing anymore, that's gender abolished. And we're getting to that point, like as we blend that category out, as we make it mean even less than it already means, you just naturally lead to this position, which is, yeah.
Mm, mm, mm. Yeah, I mean, I can continue to aggressively agree with you with like slight variations, right? Like, because that I think is effectively the true case. It's like you and I have like we have a recipe for the same dish with like very slight changes in particular ingredients.
And you have helped me. So you've helped me realize that when I talk about this, I need to talk about it in two ways. I need to talk about it in the now. And I've made fun of other people for this before, so I really should have thought about this. But like I have to talk about it in the now. And in the now, I'm not a gender abolitionist because I can't be yet. In the now, I'm a feminist. In the now, there's a patriarchal society that oppresses women of all types, and that we need to break that oppression down, and we need to break down this hierarchy. And that's right now. And in the long term, I'm a gender abolitionist, in that I am going to long term say that if we do that, if we start breaking down that hierarchy, after we break this hierarchy down and we start blending out these categories, we're going to lead to that position naturally. So I need to think about it that way. I need to primarily, I am just a regular feminist. I believe that, we have a patriarchal society that is an oppressive, the hierarchy. That's it. So I guess I need to remember that as well. And that's what I've learned so far is I've learned like that I need to make sure that I'm being clear about what my timeline looks like.
Yeah, and I think well, I mean, I just love talking to you. You're based just anything, but like I think maybe I need to when I talk to people who define themselves as abolitionists, like do a little bit of clarificatory work to see what they actually mean. Because
Yeah.
for me, I'm just so used to being like, okay, but you're talking about abolishing things that aren't gender. You're talking about things that are correlated to gender and related to gender, but are more actually results of things like patriarchy and
Yeah.
socialization. And those things can be abolished without abolishing the category of gender. But I think, to be honest, you're right. That is something that occurs on a continuum. If I look at gender abolition as a viewpoint that is setting a goal so that we ensure that any reform along the way leads towards that goal and doesn't divert and lead to something else crazy that we don't want. Like gender abolition is just setting a strong end point so we know what we're working toward.
I would agree
Yeah.
with that. I'm just like, I love that. This is always what happens. And this is always what happens when you have two people who at first think they're talking about something entirely different. And they're actually talking about we're talking about the same thing. We're just talking about it on different timescales. And that's fine. But that's not surprising. We're both feminists. We both are well-read feminists. We're both going to reach the same positions. So
I mean, this is like the whole point of the area of philosophy that I work in. It says that problems should be dissolved, not solved. And the idea that most problems are actually a result of misunderstanding. So you need to work to like clarify understanding so that you can then dissolve the problem away instead of like trying to solve it. I
Yeah.
think we did a good job at dissolving our issue.
Yeah, no, I think so too. I feel like I understand your position better. And
I definitely understand yours.
I always value this because like it's important for me to hear from lots of different people and hear like it helps me inform my like worldview. So I really, really value this type of conversation where I can talk to you and understand your position and not feel like we have to have a debate of like who's right and who's wrong. Because
Me too.
even if you disagreed with me entirely, I would have learned about your position. And that's what I'm here for. That's what I'm always here for in those panels. So I definitely appreciate this ability.
Yeah.
If we have like, so Prime was saying like we have, if there's time, like we can take questions from people. People have had questions.
I'm happy to answer questions.
Prime's off in the wings.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hooray. Okay. And on that last point, Alice, this is what happened between you and I, but it's like a lot more aggressively. We're agreeing on the same thing, and I've done this with Joe too. But like we're agreeing, we're using different words, and we're talking past each other. And it would be great if I could manage not to do that with you in the future. But yeah, I know it's fine. So let's go. And to the rest of my audience, yeah, if you have any more questions, I've been soliciting them. I didn't actually talk about like doing this with my two guests here previously, getting questions. But if you have any questions, submit them now. Just let me know, and I'll ask them. So there was one person who had a pretty simple question. Is gender abolition the same as post-genderism?
Yes. Post-genderism is another word for gender abolition. That's like my really, really, really long-term position. So yes.
I would say post-genderism is descriptive of like the world that will exist following gender abolition. So gender abolition is the praxis. It's like how this gets done. It's the ideology in terms of what you're trying to achieve. And post-genderism is the world that will exist once that occurs.
Okay. All right. Straightforward. All right. So Celtic Frosting asked, how would everything that you were talking about, how does that relate with reproductive rights in other parts of the world where sex is more important than gender?
We kind of addressed that, Joe. We basically said sometimes you're talking about sex, and the answer is when you need to talk about sex, you make it clear you're talking about sex. Simple as that.
Yeah, and I mean, like as I said, for me personally, if I use the word woman, it's not I do without knowing. So the meaning is created by the context in which I'm speaking. So if like, and I always find this really interesting. Sometimes I'll talk about women and I realize as I'm talking that there are people who aren't women who fit that description, right? Because maybe I am talking about sex, but to refer to those people as female might create harm as well. So then it's that thing of language of being like, oh, do I refer to it as anyone with a uterus? Or, but like sometimes I'll clarify that I'm using woman as a catch-all term, or I'll try and be more specific with my language. But I think the meaning of a term or the language you use needs to be specific to the context in which you're doing it. As Alice said, sometimes we're speaking about sex. Sometimes your definition or understanding of what the concept of gender is in a particular practical moment might be different to what it is in another. So if you're talking about sex and reproductive rights in different countries, your understanding of that term will be specifically related to that circumstance.
Okay. So this is a question for me then. This goal, how, I don't know, maybe it's unfair to ask this, but how do you see this real progression ever happening in like the global south, right? So like these talks, sometimes it can feel very first world, right? And that these people in their different cultural contexts maybe would not want any of these things. I mean, I'm sure there's some people who definitely agree with your goals here, but like the likelihood that any sort of meaningful movement to gender abolition or whatever it is you want in the end, seems almost impossible in so many of these places, especially when they're fighting for very, very basic rights.
Right, but that's why Joe brought that up. That's goal number one. That's before anything. So that's the prerequisite. So yeah, I mean, even though you can do more than one thing at once, yeah, I mean, we need to address that first in those places. Yes.
And also, in many ways, the Global South is a leader in terms of giving us examples of way that we can blend concepts, because gender is not uniform around the world. And as someone who lives a lot closer to the Global South and spends a lot of time in the Global South, presentations of gender and gender social roles are very different in the Global South and in the Pacific than they are in the Western world. So it actually provides sort of a map or an example of the way that gender is not uniform and can be changed conceptually.
So are you, and I think that's a really good point in terms of gender presentation, but are you saying basically that we can't, and none of us can be free unless all of us are free? And if that's the case, then I mean, this seems like this goal is a lot farther than, I mean, like 100 years would be an incredibly generous timescale.
Well, depends because of technology as well. Like as Alice was saying, if gender ideas are extremely linked to sex, and sex is linked to a role that we play in the reproductive matrix, as technology challenges our ideas about female and male's role in reproduction, then that has a huge effect on the timeline of gender abolition or the change of gender roles and changes in understanding of sex.
Yep, which is why Firestone focused so heavily on making it so that women didn't have to be the people who are giving birth, that there was a way for
And
that not to be true.
I think that's the center of Donna Haraway's work in cyborg ontology as well, that the
Yep.
freedom of woman comes from the advent of like
Yes.
technology.
Oh, like
Which
like birth control.
Yeah, birth
Yeah,
control
like,
is actually, yeah.
huge.
Birth control is a great example.
Sorry, I don't. Were you going to say something, Alice? I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No,
Oh,
not
okay,
really. I was
okay.
going to say, I'm glad, like, I love talking to Jo because she's read all these things as well. So we're like able to talk about the same stuff.
It's like when you meet someone who's read all the same manga that you've read, right? And you could just,
Of course,
yeah,
it's like that.
it's
Yeah.
exactly like that. No,
Identical.
I think
Yeah.
so.
I know that experience. I know what that feels like.
All right. Okay. So, all right. Dancing Spoon has a question. You guys take it where you want it. We acknowledge that humans are sexually dimorphic. Do we believe that we would be a more harmonious species if that didn't exist? If yes, should we work towards that?
Jo.
I'm just thinking.
Hmm.
Interesting. I'm trying to think about harmony, right? That's my focus in that question. I don't know because so there's arguments like gender nihilist arguments, right? Say that even if we proliferate like categories of gender and we create more categories of gender, then categories are by nature exclusionary, and that deviance from those categories results in violence because those things are punished. So to say that push away from gender dimorphism might result in greater harmony, I'm not sure, because maybe it would just create different, like I even talk about this when, oh God, Joe's talking about consent. But like when homosexuality was normalized, right, the new model of our understanding of sex was the consenting adult. So then it didn't matter if you were homosexual. All that mattered was that you were a consenting adult. So then pedophilia had this boom in terms of being the deviant thing that needed to be punished. So, and that's why I think that the gender abolition as a goalpost is really interesting, because it's like we don't want to, on our way to that reality, create like new paradigms which result in more harm by creating new deviances. So I don't know if getting rid of sexual dimorphism would create new deviances and which might be punished. In which case, no, it wouldn't create more harmony. But maybe it would. I don't know is the answer to the question. What
Right,
about you, Alex?
we kind of addressed it a little bit. Like, so if we blend out if we blend out sex categorization, if we blend it out, then we're going to lead to this same position more than likely of like we're blending gender out as well then. So I can't really call it harmonious, but yeah, I mean, I guess if we didn't differentiate as heavily between men and women, and like males and females, I should say, if we didn't differentiate so heavily between males and females, I would say that would be a positive. There's always going to be some stuff that people who are XY normative or are gonna have different than XX normative. So I'm not really sure we can ever do anything to entirely blend that out. There's always going to be normative XX and normative XY, and that's always going to exist because that's just how human physiological development works. So kind of it's hard to answer that in any really good way.
So I should have mentioned that before to my audience because not everyone knows what that is. Sexual dimorphism. It's when the sexes within a species have different characteristics, physical characteristics. Men tend to be larger than women in humans, right? And some animals it's the other way around, or sometimes they have like different colors, but they're still the same species, that type of thing.
Yep.
So the idea being behind Spoon's question is, men being bigger and oftentimes stronger than women. If we could balance that out, balance out the difference between those traits, would we, when women would not be able to suffer against violence from men so easily?
I guess
Is this
what I was. Yeah.
Is this a eugenics position?
Okay. So the second question is what I said. Like I said that to Spoon. It sounds like eugenics because if you're going to work towards non-dimorphism, then that would have to be eugenics.
Yeah, that sounds like eugenics. So my answer is I don't think you can do that because the only way to make physiological changes on a large scale are eugenics.
And I think I was just jumping the eugenics hurdle and going, let's say this did occur naturally somehow without eugenics. If you created no physical differences between men and women, we would find something else to be deviant.
But that might be positive. I just don't think I could support eugenics to get to that level.
Yeah.
Like, because I think any other categorization that we had. So like if Dancing Spoon implements their eugenics program and makes like males and females like physiologically the same, other than maybe genitalia, I suppose. But if they implement this eugenics program, then Joe's right. There's going to be some other like categorization that happens, but it's not going to be based on like the superiority of one group, right? It's not going to be based on one group. Like it's not going to be hierarchical like that. There's going to be some other hierarchy, right? But like it won't be male female hierarchy at least. Like so that could be positive, I guess.
Okay. All right.
I don't think we should do it, but.
All right, fair enough. So, Spoon, we're all going to be drawing conclusions about your character from that question. Great, thanks, buddy. I'm moving on.
Alice, a question really quickly. I desperately need to go to the bathroom because I drank I don't know why.
Okay, please go ahead.
We can just sit here and twiddle our thumbs.
We can. Hold on. I'll just
Yeah, come join me and twiddle your thumbs.
Hooray.
Let's do. I don't read manga, but I watch a lot of anime because I'm a hardcore weeb. I never said that. I'm not. I have to mute you in one place.
Okay, I'll mute. Okay, I'm mute here. But I think this is a really interesting discussion so far.
Thank you so much for giving us the space for this, because I love those panels, but sometimes I get to this point where I just want to learn more about somebody else's position, and Joe and I would have done that regardless. But to be able to do that here and have your audience be able to participate and see this, I think that's probably positive. People can see it's not always going to be blood sports. Sometimes it can be interesting discussions that are like this.
Indeed, no, and I definitely enjoyed that, and I'm glad to be able to give two very intelligent people the space to talk about these things and these conversations that you don't see. I mean, these things happen within an academic space, but hold on, she's back.
Not on Twitch politics; they don't usually happen.
Yeah, so. Yeah. I was saying that these types of conversations happen and academic spaces all the time, but yeah, not on Twitch politics. You'll never see anything like this, and especially for long periods of time, right? And without someone's space getting ripped off, it's not likely. So yeah, I wanted to do that, but I'll get off of here and get back to we'll get back to it.
No, but thank you for providing space for Alice and I to have this conversation as well, because like it's really good to be able to engage in this way and like have this kind of platform to do it as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. All right. And
Bye, Prime.
All right. Okay. All right. So back at it. There were at least 2 other questions. And again, everyone, if you want to take the time now to let me know if you have any questions, like tag me in chat so I can be sure that I see it. Celtic Frosting. Did I already ask your one question? Let me see. Okay, yeah, all right. Let me. I think you have a follow up here for Joe and Alice. Like in the Middle East, the way it's assumed to be feels so far away sometimes, especially because it's locked into religion. And being allowed to do different things was based on being assigned at birth. Sorry if the question was phrased badly. No problem. Did you understand what you sorry.
Yeah. And I mean, it's super. Okay, so I lived in the Gulf, which is an area where also a lot of things are segregated completely. So like on the bus, I sat in a different area.
You faded. You faded. Buddy.
You're gone.
Yeah. Oh God.
Can't hear you.
Wave your hands, cause so she can. Yeah. All right.
Professional streamer.
Can't
hear you.
No more hearing. Oh, what happened? It's just making a good point.
I can unmute here.
Yeah,
can
there
you
you
hear
go.
me here?
There we go. I can hear you.
You can, but I can't hear you.
You can't. Oh shit! Seriously? You can't. So you can hear me. Oh no, she left the fucking. Get back here. You left me. Hold on. Why did you leave the channel? Okay. Unmute yourself. Oh my God. Unmute yourself here in StreamYard then.
My Discord has just like blown up. It says I'm still in the room.
Okay.
And nothing is weird on my Discord. It just says that you can't hear me.
Oh, okay. Sometimes you just like freeze. Then.
Well, it's Australia. I'm in Australia. I'm trying to talk about the Middle East. I'm being silenced.
Oh my! You've like really.
Oh. Okay. Wait. I
this.
think I'm. Okay. Don't worry. Then we'll be here. Yeah. So. Okay, I thought you were reacting to how wild my story was. I was like, wow. Yeah, it really was like that.
You stopped at the point where you were on the bus in a separate area way back then.
Oh, yeah. So when I was on the bus, I was in separate areas. When I lined up for amusement parks, I had my own line. My university was split down the middle with boys on one side and girls on the other. When I met some boys at my university, I shook one of their hands and he cried and left because he felt that he had shamed me by doing that because according to him, I was a beautiful diamond and I wasn't his to touch and that had caused some huge... It's like I have lived in a society where gender is so ingrained in literally every institution and every understanding. And the crazier thing is like, so I did my research report on women's rights in the Gulf of the Middle East. And when I talked to all my friends, they were like, I'd be like, how do you feel like not being able to drive? And my friends would be like, why would we want to drive? We have drivers. So like it is very difficult. And they're like, oh no, it's great that we're separated. It means that like, we never have to worry about being safe, blah, 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 which is obviously not true. But just like the way that it was also inculcated into it, just like almost like what Alice was saying before in terms of like, even with me, I don't know that like when I say I enjoy things, am I enjoying them because I enjoy them or because I think that I'm making a choice that I'm actually not making, right? Which I agree with. I just hate that I agree with it and I hate myself. No. But yeah, I think it is difficult with the Middle East. I just think it, and places like the Middle East, and this is to me the importance when it comes to praxis, is that everything must have specificity. You can have universal goals and you can have an idea of how things should be and a prescriptive idea, but the way to do that is it has to be specific. And that's not even just like, oh, we have a different approach in the Middle East. I mean, look at something like race in America. Being black in LA means a very different thing to being black in Omaha or being black in New Orleans. So you can't have this sort of universal approach to any sort of abstract concept, even if you have a sort of universal goal.
Do you want to add anything else to that?
Not really. We're very well aligned on this. So like I agree. Like which is why it's a long term goal, not something, we've got immediate needs right now. So
Joe, you were telling me before, like it's like some of the not traditions, but like traditional female activities that you enjoy, right? And you're like, is it because I actually enjoy them, or is it because society is telling me I have to enjoy them, right?
And I mean, like, to an extent, it's porque no los dos, right? Like, because, like, obviously I don't have a choice about some things, but that doesn't mean that I can't find joy in them. I don't know. And that makes it even more difficult to make the distinction. Because it's like, if you view every choice or every aspect of your life as oppressive, well, that's horrible. If you view every section of like a core, like for me, and it's like it integrates into every part of my work being a woman. So like if I view every aspect of that gendered identity as oppressive, that is going to make me very sad most of the time. But it's true that it can be oppressive and I can find joy in it at the same time, which makes it all the more confusing.
But we don't know our motives all the time. We don't necessarily always know every piece of ourselves. We don't know that we're identifying with. We don't know necessarily why we're identifying with something, and that doesn't matter. We don't have to say that everything about gender is oppressive for it to still be overall something that we should, try to move past some of the stuff that we can address. We don't have to say every facet of your gender is oppressive, but we can say, well, if we're going to blend this category out a bit, we're going to blend it here, make it so that it can apply to these other people. It's going to apply to these people. We're going to move towards that.
This is like the crux of our original misunderstanding, because for me, when I hear gender abolition, I hear the abolition of gender concepts, not the obsolescence of gender concepts. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
so for me, I totally agree with your position on gender abolition. To me, that's just not always the position that I'm given when I speak to gender abolitionists.
No, sometimes you're going to get people who are like, no one can have any gender. No gender. It's gone.
And to an extent, Firestone and Haslanger define gender through oppression. So,
yes, they did, but they were also second wave feminists.
I know.
They were so we're working in a different framework. I mean, they're working in the framework you would apply, in the places, for instance, where it's still primarily going to be sex-based oppression. They're working in that framework, and so the things that we learn from Firestone, for instance, they could be applicable for those places, maybe. Like we do have to think about it that way. Like we may be talking about third or fourth wave feminism, but there are places that are essentially still on second wave feminism. It's not like there's not countries that are still going to be in that level of progression. Like there's going to be places where they're still going to need to take into account the things that we learned from first and second wave feminism. It's going to still exist right now.
I think this also basically just answered your question. Mitch on Twitch, I saw your question and they pretty much answered it just now. So I hope you found that satisfying. If not, then let me know. Then like restate your question, and I'll ask it. All right. So we have well, let's try Rabbit Wombat. There's always a lot of noise about the Nordic studies showing as freedom increases. Differences between men and women maximize. What are your thoughts on those studies that get quoted, and what impact does that have on the concept of gender abolition?
Joe?
Okay, just a hot take quickly. I always hate anything Nordic because I think Nordic policies are very good at representing something that they aren't necessarily underneath. So I don't know if Alice agrees with me, but I would need to look at these studies. And sure, freedom
That's what I was
creates,
going to ask.
yeah, freedom creates maybe more difference, but differences between men and women, that these, as I say, I like to use categories that have meaning within their context. So I don't know what is meant by man and woman without looking at this study. So saying that the differences between man and woman is exaggerated in a more free society, does that mean that there are different kinds of expressions of womanhood and different kinds of expression of manhood? Go for it, Alice.
So this study was very weird, and it's like a study that basically showed that like in the places that have the most like separated concepts of gender or the most like progressive concepts of gender, they're also the societies that have the most differences in gender. It's an interesting study. There's lots of like theories about why it happens. Like it could be related to the types of jobs that are available. It could be, there's like lots of things that it could be related to, but nobody really draws the causality of, oh, well, if you make people more free, then they just go and pick other gendered things. Nobody drew that conclusion from that study. That's just a weird conclusion that people on the internet like drawing from it. The original study basically just says, oh, that's a weird effect. It could have lots of reasons. And that's all it says. It does not draw a conclusion that says, you know, more freedom means more gender. That's not the conclusion that they draw.
That's something I find really interesting, and just as like an interesting general rule, because I see it happen a lot on Twitch. When it comes to social sciences, you cannot prove causation. You can only prove correlation. So maybe there is an interesting correlation between freedom and gender expression, but it is just a correlation. You can't say that freedom has a causative effect on gender expression.
Yeah.
I feel like, so Leah, the question you're relating to me, I feel like this kind of been answered a bit. Gender abolition is oppression, especially if we are being coerced to accept it. I value gender categories and would be happy to create new ones or expand existing ones. Don't destroy gender categories, please. Like, this is what other people, like, that's kind of been the whole, unless you want to say something about it.
I linked the study, or not a study, actually.
Yeah, thank you. I'm reading it now.
Okay.
I linked a summary from BBC. It's a relatively good summary of it.
Okay. It was, I know it wasn't your question, Leah. But I think
Leah, I think Alice and I got close to an agreement on this, which might be satisfying for you, in that gender abolition is a social goal that relates to like wide social structures, but it doesn't necessarily make any prescriptions on what you personally do. So we can abolish strong concepts of gender and you can still identify as a woman. It just means that by identifying as a woman, people can't assume as much about you. Using that concept and categorization. So when you say that you're a woman, it doesn't mean that you like pink and you like girly things and you only watch chick flicks and you're quiet and submissive. Like, those things are no longer assumed when you identify as a woman. However, whatever being a woman means to you, you're still free to identify with on a personal level.
Okay.
So that satisfied me. So hopefully it satisfies you. Yeah.
Whatever Alice is eating apparently satisfying her very well. There you go. All right. So we have one more question left, and if you guys have any others, like, now is the time. Throw it in chat. So I will see it. All right. But that's from Bento Box, our good friend Bento Box. Why should Joe blend her experience and identity out to a point where it means nothing, but people who don't feel recognized shouldn't abandon or blend out their identities to non-existence? Simply put, why should Joe negate her identity through dilution, but others should not?
That's a good question. Joe, if you have thoughts on it, please go first. But I have thoughts on it.
Okay. I wonder how closely our thoughts will align. So for me, a category, as I said at the beginning, has a prototype at the center and then fuzzy boundaries as we go out. So changing this concept through dilution, as you said, I don't think it's necessarily dilution. I think it's expanding the category out and out and out so that more people exist within it. The concept is changed, so whatever these prototypes in the middle, they don't mean as much or aren't as strict. I don't see that as dilution. I'm still changing the category of woman. Doesn't mean that I'm any less a woman. It just means that more people can identify as a woman. And it maybe changes the meaning, but not in ways that I necessarily find to negatively affect me. So I don't mind if we change it so that people don't view women as holistically submissive. That doesn't affect what as I have said, I'm not able to express in language what it is about gender that is appealing to me, but it's certainly not anything that gender abolitionists seek to get rid of. It's not to do with the subordinate role in society, for instance. So for me, I don't view the inclusion of other people into the category of woman or the conceptual changing of woman as synonymous with the abolishment of the category. To me, those two things are not the same. So it would be different if your question is, why should Jo have to give up her gender so that people who don't want any genders are happy? That is a different question to why should Jo have to dilute her gender so that other people can feel more included? Because I don't think that including other people actually dilutes my gender or identity.
Yeah. And that's actually all the point that I was going to bring up is essentially nobody's asking Jo to dilute her own sense of gender. We're talking about the categorization and that we might want to dilute the categorization. That doesn't mean that Jo needs to change her anything at all. She doesn't have to do anything. So I see kind of where that question was leading. Because like, why shouldn't somebody like me maybe just dilute my own identity out or something like that? But I can't really do that anyway. Me asking Jo to dilute her own identity doesn't make any more sense than asking me to do it. You can't do that. What is my identity anyway? What is it exactly that I'm identifying with? We've already said that. Like, so it doesn't really make any sense to apply it that way. Jo's not gonna have to dilute anything about her identity, and neither am I. That's about the categorization as a whole, about the societal, view of what being a woman means, diluting that concept out so that it's more inclusive. And as we keep making it more inclusive, we're going to make it so it just doesn't mean anything. And that is the positive. That's the goal on my side. Make it so it doesn't mean much of anything.
Which is interesting because, like, I'm sorry to keep rehashing, but I find that so interesting because, like, personally for me, it doesn't mean all of these things necessarily. Like when someone asks me for a meaning of gender, like you did at the very beginning, it didn't have any descriptive contents, which I think is what you're seeking to do to the gender on a social level, like beyond personal beliefs about gender. It's just creating it so it is a category without necessarily having any descriptive content.
Yes. Yeah, because like when somebody says, "Oh, you're a woman," to me, it's a weird thing for like, okay, what does that mean? Like, so I'm glad to hear that you think that I look like I'm female. Like that's what that means to me when I hear it. Like, good. Yeah, that's what I'm going for. Thanks. But like, what else are you applying to me? Like, are you saying that like because of the things that you see that make you assume that I'm female? Or are you saying it because I'm being socially submissive? Or are you saying it because I'm wearing a dress? Or are you saying it because I have long hair? Or are you saying it like, why are you saying it because I sound female? Like, why are you, what does that categorization actually apply to me?
Yeah. And I guess that's interesting because that's never an experience I've had, like where someone has identified me like that. So for me, my understanding of the concept of woman is really about my relationship with it solely. I guess in a way, everyone has always identified me with that. It's just never spoken. So I've never had to grapple with it because it's not explicit.
Yeah. And for me, I see society. I see that society takes the category woman and is making it hierarchical. And I get pushed into that hierarchy. And when I'm in that hierarchy, what it makes me want to do is destroy that fucking hierarchy. I wanted to do that before this too. This is not new. I've always been this way. I've always been a feminist. I've always addressed this hierarchical society that we have, this patriarchal society that we have. I've always addressed it this way. But it's very different being forced into it than it is to be in the privileged role, essentially being able to be like in this privileged role and be like, oh yes, the patriarchy. Yep. We got to dismantle it. And then actually being forced into it and being like, I still believe the same thing, but holy shit, now I'm being applied things that just are not helpful to me at all and are not helpful to women in general at all. Being assumed to be socially submissive is bullshit. Like there's
And I mean, there are ways also, this is totally off topic, but I just want to mention it because I was thinking about this last night. There are ways that these gender norms, even the chauvinistic ones, harm men. Like, I was thinking about this whole thing about how women aren't safe on the streets, and I was thinking about how actually men are not safe on the streets much more so than women. But that's also a lot of the time because, for instance, even robbers can have chauvinistic beliefs. So a robber might beat the shit out of a dude, but be like, oh, I won't hit a woman. I won't hit a woman, which ends up making women safer. So it's interesting how even these chauvinistic, misogynistic, patriarchal beliefs can cause a lot of harm to men by proxy.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I agree with that too. Like, that's one of the big things for me is like, there's like things about gender that are harming everybody involved. So like men are also assumed to not be able to, you know, like as a man, you get made fun of if you cry. You're expected to be self-sufficient to the point of toxicity. You're expected to not act gay. There's like all these things that are expected of a man in society. You're expected to be the provider, even if these things aren't actually true, and we claim that like we're not actually doing these things. Society is doing these things. Advertising, media, like the way that men talk to each other, the locker room culture, these things all enforce this. So like, even though there's things about being a man that maybe could be good, they're not actually things about being a man. They're just things about being a human that are good. Like it can be good to be self-sufficient sometimes, but that's not a man thing. That's a people thing. Sometimes it's good to be able to be self-sufficient and strong in your own emotional state and be able to deal with things that are thrown at you. But it's also good to be able to say, hey, I need help, and please, social safety net, please help me, and not have to feel shitty about it. Like that's what I'm saying is these things that we gender are all like the things that we gender like that. Those are all should not be gendered. You shouldn't gender the concept of not crying, or those things shouldn't be applied. And there's like good things about being a man or good things about being a woman, but like, why can't you just have those things as a human? Why do you have to have those things as a man or a woman? Why can't you just enjoy those things because you're a person?
Well, and that's like, I don't want to talk on it because I haven't read it, but here we go. There's a work by a woman named Charlotte Witt on unessentialism, which is like an essentialism, but it's like an essentialism just with you. So like a concept meaning something just to you. And so that's where I get the difficulty when it comes to like, when you're like, oh, well, what does that mean? I'm like, I don't know. It's a feeling, Alice. And that's where I think there's something. That's why that distinction you made is so important to me, the separation between the interpersonal and the personal level and the social level.
Yeah. And I don't know. I just think that like it's important for people like me to remember that like there are people like you who that draw a lot of meaning from this category. But it's also important, vice versa, to realize that the meaning you might be drawing from this category, if you actually want to be progressive, is going to be meaningless.
Yeah. And I acknowledge that, which is so interesting to me, because the feeling that I have of gender when I talk about it in terms of what it means to me is sufficiently different from the way that I operationalize gender as a concept when I'm doing work. So gender, and if someone asked me for the meaning of gender, as I said, just like irrigare, my instinct would be to laugh because I don't want to define it. To me, it shouldn't have descriptive contents. And its only meaning for me is in terms of how it is operationalized, what it is being used to do. But I do find it to be a useful concept for that sort of teleological purpose right now. Exactly.
Right now.
So, yeah. And I guess I'm just not looking as forward as you are. Or I haven't yet, but I'm willing to, yes.
Right. And I think you are looking forwards. I think you're just, I think you're being more immediate. Like right now, this is what we have to do. And what the results of that are just doesn't matter, because this is like, I'm not being regressive, I'm being progressive. So it doesn't matter. And I guess that's like a good thing, in how you do it. Like I should take some pages from your book there, because that actually is a good way to deal with it. Is to say, woman doesn't really mean something specific other than like this feeling of identification with this category. And I want to make it so that category is not oppressed in society. And if I do that, then it will lead to my end goal. So I can just do that. You know what I mean? Like, as long as I'm being progressive.
Yeah. It's yeah. It's just my brain is like, blah, blah, blah.
Someone asked something interesting.
Before you do that, I just want to Uh, because when you talked about how these gender categories or these gender stereotypes can be oppressive to men as well, and I totally agree. An example I've used on stream before is when it comes to childcare, right? And that like feminism helped free men to take, at least like wasps anyway, to take care of their kids, right? Rather than like just coming home and like demanding dinner and popping something on the TV, right? And I'm not supposed to handle the children, right? That's supposed to be what she does, right? It's like, no, men should be involved with the child care. You should form those relationships, those bonds, right? They're very important. And free men up to have the concept of a stay-at-home dad, right? And I say it again, that I have a friend who actually does that, is a stay-at-home dad. And because his wife just happened to have made more than him, so he decided to stay home. It just made sense. But still, you get shit from that. Like I remember relating this to a family member, and like, and it was an immediate like reaction, a negative reaction to that, right? And you have a person who's clearly involved with their children, right? Like doing a great work child raising, got beautiful kids. And like everything's being taken care of, financially and emotionally and all of that stuff. But the immediate revulsion, no, that's bad idea. What's going on? Don't like it at all. And that's just how damaging those concepts still are. So I thought that was really interesting. Go ahead, Joe.
But something interesting about that as well is like, and this is what we've sort of been getting at, and we've sort of like reached some sort of agreement on, right? Is that as we see these sort of structural changes and as we lessen patriarchal oppression, so as it becomes possible for a woman to make more money than a man, we open up the possibility of the man being the person who stays at home, right, in a heterosexual relationship. And while we might be at a stage now where that is new, so there's still a lot of stigma attached to that because that is divergent and deviant to what a man should do, as that becomes more common, then we are ameliorating the concept of man to be someone who can stay at home and the woman to be someone who can be a breadwinner. So we're changing those concepts. So now either work. And so these two things sort of work hand in hand. And as we see these structural sort of oppressions fade away, we actually see a conceptual change in what we mean by gender categories.
I just love this because I feel like we really have made progress here in this discussion. Like we've come to this realization that actually, yeah, we're talking about the same thing and we're just talking about it at different timescales. Like if we wipe out this type of oppression, like you just said, it's going to start blending those things out. If a man can do either of these things and a woman can do either of these things, that's yet another thing that's just not a gendered categorization anymore. Being the breadwinner is not gendered anymore, and that's good. That's positive.
And so I think that was like my huge thing for you, is that like for me, I get so stuck because I am short-term thinking of like the idea that these oppressions have to be overcome before we can change the language, because we need the language to be able to do that. So like, and that is such a timescale thing. You're so right.
So that actually, somebody in chat asked this question, and it was why I thought it was kind of interesting. The user is Get Off My Yard, about if the goal is to abolish genders, is having a Women's Month or a Women in Tech group hurting that cause? And the answer is no, because right now it's important to bring attention to this group of women who is oppressed in society. So right now, no, it's not a problem at all. It's great. But as we keep blending these things out, it's going to mean less to say that.
Yeah.
So you might still have a Women in Tech group, but it's going to mean less about what you're actually saying. It's going to not be surprising. And that's good. When we get to that point where it's no longer surprising, then that's great. That's what we want. We don't want it to be surprising to have women in tech. That shouldn't be that should just be like, yeah, duh. Not like a wow, look at these women in tech. Look at these women CEOs, amazing. That should not happen, right? We should get to the point where it's just not even surprising, where there's no surprise in that.
Destroy the capitalists in the first place, so there are no.
Well, I was going to say there's a different argument. The harm in a woman in tech organization is not the fact that they are operationalizing the category of woman. It's that it's focusing on a very specific definition of woman, one who's in a position already to be in an industry like tech, and their ultimate goal is to rise up to be a tech CEO millionaire. So like, as I said at the beginning of the conversation as well, I think that feminist praxis should be centered around the most oppressed and the most in danger. And so for me, I'm like, I don't really give a shit about women in tech, because unless you're working on making artificial wombs, that ain't it for me. I'm more worried about the woman in the global south working in a sweatshop to make the clothes that go on that woman in tech.
Yep.
So
Yep. So Brento Box there says, so you're saying no, but the ultimate answer is yes. No, I'm saying no. So this is never going to be a harm for the gender abolition that I am talking about. Maybe you want to like take me uncharitably or something. I'm not really sure, but like, no, this is never going to be a problem. So like, if you keep going, 100 years from now, you have women in tech. That's not going to be meaningful if there's no longer a hierarchical structure that makes women less likely to be in tech. If that is not true anymore, then what does it mean to say women in tech? It's just normal. It's just a thing that happens normally. That's great. That's positive. And like Joe said, we don't need to focus on women in tech. I mean, we should right now like have those types of things, but we do need to focus on like the fact that there are women in sweatshops being, like forced to work on the clothing for those women in tech. And those types of things are more important right now. And I address that. I agree with that. We need to focus on the now, right now. Like I can have this prescriptive idea of what maybe the future should look like, but that doesn't mean that we don't have the same thing right now of what we need to do. Right now, we need to work on hierarchical oppression. Yes, capitalism counts as hierarchical oppression. Yes.
And
sorry, Prime, just quickly.
Please.
It's totally unrelated. I can't help myself. But like this is my point. Like yesterday on the women's panel, when I was talking about the woman at the center of the Roe v. Wade case who was abandoned by the women's movement because she wasn't a good role model for the movement they were trying to push. She had addiction issues. She was bisexual. She was working class. So she wasn't the image that they wanted to push. And this can be the problem with groups like Women in Tech or like Women CEOs. It's like they are presenting a very specific kind of woman, and that can exclude the women who are actually facing the most oppression and the most gender depression.
I don't know, maybe that might be a distraction.
I know, sorry, I'm a butterfly mind. I was
no,
we're here.
No, it's fine. I was also thinking of and maybe it doesn't relate to the woman, Rosa Parks with the bus protest, right? But there was another woman before her who like could have been that test case, but she, I think, was a woman who had like gotten pregnant when she was young or something like that. She was just like not the right type of woman to be presenting, for this. You needed Rosa Parks, someone who is like impeccable moral character, like the right type of femininity, right? Which includes being like chaste or something.
Yeah. And I mean, like, I think I think one of the worst things that happened to the women's movement was Gloria Steinem, because I think because I think that pretty women who are good with the media now are the center of what we view as feminist praxis. And it is a real distortion from, like, think about all the women who publish books and, like, I mean, women who look like me, to be quite frank. It makes it really hard for me to be a feminist and practice what I preach, because what I want to say is women who look like me shouldn't be the center of feminist movements and shouldn't be the leaders of feminist movements. So it is really difficult to acknowledge that and then work out how to position yourself within feminist movements and other kind of movements, because so much of it has turned into branding and pushing a personal sort of like feminism is now a job instead of a political movement.
Well, don't worry, Joe, I'll help you out.
I loved it.
I think there's a place though, like, you have privilege and you should use your privilege to advance things. I think that's the important thing, is like, just because you have a privilege doesn't mean you shouldn't use it to actually make change. Like, I have lots of privilege and I use it to make change.
It is interesting because when I first started getting into Aboriginal advocacy, First Nations advocacy in my country, I spoke to a woman who writes a lot on it, and I was like, oh, I really want to get involved in this and I want to write research on this, but I don't want to step on any toes, right? Like, I don't know how to do that. And her response was like, yeah, but you can't abrogate your responsibility either. And it's like, when you're interested in it, you make it a mainstream thing, and like when you have the ability to bring it more attention to it. But it's about like very simple things, like when I have an idea, or like when I like an idea, making sure that I credit that idea to the thinker who originally came up with it, instead of just being like, aren't I intelligent? Look at this brilliant idea I had, when it's actually a Black woman's idea or a trans woman's idea. I can't take those ideas and pass them off as my own. Like, you know, someone like White Fragility's author, Robin DiAngelo.
Right. Being able to like make it clear where your information and where your, you know, that's important to be able to, and that's what we can do is we can signal boost people essentially. Because like hearing me talk about something trans related can be very different than hearing somebody who maybe is going to get shit essentially from society. I don't get a lot of shit from society. So I get that privilege of being able to talk about these things and not get shit on. I don't get people who are like, you're just a man. Most people don't do that to me. So I have an easier time talking about these things.
And like, for instance, like a huge thing, and I just want to say it because it's advice that I always give to everyone. Like, I go to a lot of protests and I always dress in business attire and I stand at the front because the media want to portray people at protests as like doll bludgers or people who are all associated with a particular kind of image. They don't want that professional image being associated with a protest. So even the ability to have that kind of clothing and physically represent the opposite of what the media narrative wants to present about a protest is really powerful.
Yeah.
Don't worry, they can edit you out.
I know, but I can try.
Yeah, I know. It's worthwhile, but yeah. So Get Off My Yard has been trying to respond. So Get Off My Yard originally asked the question if the goal is to abolish genders, why the women in tech thing, right? And then they kept responding with, so when do you know when we are at that point? What metric? I'm not exactly sure exactly what point they're referring to here, but then they go on to say, earlier they say correlation is not causation. So how can you simply look at a specific field of study population and say there is oppression? And if more women go into a field, one can still not say it is better or worse. And then it's like Claudette Colvin was the lady's name. I don't know.
They're talking about that's the person, that's the earlier person that you were talking about that was like bad PR essentially. The question they're asking, Joe, is about essentially, so we're talking about like patriarchal oppression, and they're asking like, how do you know that like there is this oppression? I don't really even care to like, I don't know if we really want to address that. Like the way that I always address this type of thing is like, I will link you to lots of feminist literature and you can read it, but this is like hundreds of years of history. This is not like a question. This is literally a fact. And the only way to deny that fact is to deny hundreds of years of history. Like, I don't know how to help you, you know, like if you're not willing to engage with that, then
and it's also, it comes back to this thing about like what I always say with the sex gender distinction. Let's talk about like a correlation causation distinction. Just because that things can have extremely strong correlation, that doesn't mean that they're meaningless because it's not causation, right? Like the fact that there is a strong correlation is still indicative of something. So I think to disregard it because you're like, oh, well, it can't be proven as cause nothing unless it's actually hard science. It's the way our language works. Like there's a reason that causation only exists in hard science. And I think that we have enough evidence to suggest that we have found something worthy of a response. I think we have enough evidence that people can say a patriarchy exists or a racist system exists without needing to show. I don't even know how you would do that. I don't even know like what you would.
Get Off My Yard feels like that we missed the point. Saying,
okay.
I'm not saying it exists. It does exist. Yeah, if you could clarify that, Get Off My Yard, it would be helpful. If we weren't properly answering your question. I don't know. I have a question, but it's I don't know. It's a big one. I know it's one of those really large ones. And I think you guys have already covered it in the past, right? Because it's just kind of come up. But I guess this is to you, Alice. But in this post gender society, right? Like, are there still trans individuals?
Oh, nobody asked that question. We didn't cover that very well.
Oh.
So,
yeah,
I'm gonna get canceled. Not really. So sometimes there's different motives for transition, and some of the motives for transition can be social. The motives for transition can be wanting to transition out of this gendered like role that you're pushed into by society. Those people, no, they probably won't be trans. To be dead honest with you, the people who are transitioning because of primarily a social reason, like wanting to be able to do the things that are associated to man or wanting to be able to do the things that are associated to women, they probably won't transition because there would not be a need to. So the people there are some people like me who probably would still take hormones, but it doesn't mean that I'm like socially transitioning to be a woman. It just means I'm taking hormones and changing my physiological like expression. So that is the only difference. And again, this is long term, right? This is like 100 years from now. In 100 years from now, yeah, we probably won't have as many people who feel this need to have this massive social change because it'll just be normal. It'll just be normal. The things that we socially, assign to being a man or being a woman are just not going to be relevant at that point. It's not going to matter. You're not going to be, you're not going to have to worry about it. Is essentially the point that I would make. Now, in 50 years or something, yeah, there's still going to be trans people. In 10 years, yeah, there's still going to be trans people. Can we make life a lot better for those trans people? Yeah, absolutely. So let's do that.
So then, at that point, it wouldn't be gender dysmorphia. It would be physical dysmorphia.
Dysphoria. Dysmorphia is.
Sorry, I apologize. The other one, yeah.
No, don't worry. Just because there's maybe people who don't know the difference. Dysmorphia is when you are looking at reality and you're seeing a distorted picture. You look at reality and you are perfectly healthy, but you see yourself as fat. That is dysmorphia, right? That's body dysmorphic disorder, for instance. Yeah. Like there's things that that don't exist in reality that you see incorrectly. The dysphoria is the discomfort with what is actual reality. Your, reality is society is seeing you as a man or seeing you as male, and you feel uncomfortable, extreme discomfort and distress from that reality. It's the difference between a distorted reality and a reality that causes you discomfort. It's the difference between distorting it and the reality actually being there and being problematic for you. So there's other differentiations, but yeah.
So, to answer my question, it will be physical dysphoria then in the future,
yes.
Not gender dysphoria, because the people who would who would transition for any of the reasons, like so I can wear a dress, right, and that people won't stare at me. There's no reason to do that. Because I could just do that, I can just be me, even if I have hairy legs and arms.
Yeah, and there's like transgender is a big category, and it means like lots of things to lots of different people. And so there's always probably going to be transgender people of some sort. Even in 100 years, when there's no gender, there's going to be people who are in some way going to reject something about some system, and they're still going to be similar to what we have now. But there's groups like, for instance, people who are non-binary. There's like, but like that's it, when that's no longer surprising, and it's just a fact about somebody that this is how they present and this is what they want to be referred, and it's just a normal fact about them. It's just not. It's not going to be something interesting about you to categorize it anymore.
Yeah.
And yes, there would still probably be physical. I don't know. I'm not going to purport to know the answer to that. I think personally, when I introspect about this and I say, if society was not placing these things on me, would I still do something like take hormones? Yes, I would. I would still take hormones because physiological male characteristics are what bother me, not the societal oppression things that are, based on my, being a male. It's the physiological sex differences that matter to me primarily, which is why maybe I'm also a weird one to have in this conversation, because I get put into the group woman and I face a lot of the same things that women face, and I act very similarly to a lot of women, but I don't necessarily care to identify with the category women, other than I think it can be helpful for women in general for me to do that.
But I actually think you're the best person to have in this conversation for that, because, right, I come at it from the complete opposite, in that, to me, the category of woman means nothing, and yet I insist on identifying with it. There's some quality in it that is meaningless that I love. So it's like a weird opposite in that I can't tell you what it is that I like about it, but I feel a strong connection with the category, even though to me it's also meaningless. Right. So it's almost the opposite. You're like, I don't really identify, but all these meanings are put on me, and I'm like, there's no meaning and I love it.
It is interesting, and I think that's probably because of your ability to just be a woman and
Mm,
never have it questioned. No one is
mm,
ever going to question if you're a woman. You are,
mm,
right? You are just fundamentally, society says you are a woman, and no one will ever question that about you. For me, it's not like that. For
mm.
me, the change in physiological, in sex expression, and mostly just sex expression, to be honest with you, because I am wearing a dress today, but I normally don't. I've always
Yeah,
had long hair, and I've always so this is the only thing that really massively changed about me. I did this voice training stuff, and I took hormones,
yeah,
and I felt more free to do things like wear a dress sometimes.
yeah,
But overall, really, I didn't massively change a lot of things. So
yeah,
like for me, society pushed this onto me and pushed womanhood onto me, and
yeah.
I have to accept it, or I have to reject my own like dysphoric feelings and like put myself into the other box or something weird just for my ideology, and that's just weird to me.
And it makes me wonder if it's just because, like, maybe womanhood and femininity has been pushed on me for such a long time, like since before I even had the ability to cognitively identify it, that it feels like this extremely natural thing to me, but it's just that I've never known anything different. So it's like, what am I? It's that I can't imagine gender abolition because I've never experienced anything, and I think I really do, like I can like get a lot less femme than this, but this is more my natural state. My natural state is very femme. So like it's very hard for me to imagine this world that is non-gendered because I've never experienced anything outside of being extremely gendered.
Mm.
Right. But I think that's the thing that confuses me as well. But talking to people who are like you're not even anti-gender
Mm.
abolition, but like the people who are very traditionalist about these things. It's like the things you actually care about, like the things that you're talking about, like being ultra feminine, things like those aren't really dependent on, those are just your presentation, and
And
they're
that's not
not dependent
even,
on it.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's not even what I'm talking about when I say I'm connected to my gender. I'm not talking about those things, but I'm saying maybe the thing that I am talking about is connected to how I've been socialized using those things. And I don't know anything different because I've never, this thing that I've created since I was so young that I don't,
Yeah.
I don't know. Like even my mom was a prima ballerina. Like my examples of femininity were hyper feminine. So like it's very hard for me to imagine like even yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I
No,
don't
no,
know.
I love that perspective though. It helps me a lot too because it helps me to remember, and it's like I'm aware of this, right? I'm aware that like lots of women really like being women and they like this identification, and being able to like understand from somebody who feels that way is important. I don't get to talk to a lot of people who feel that way who are
Mm,
not also regressive about gender.
mm,
You're one of the first people I've talked to that's progressive about gender, but strongly identifies with their gender of being a woman. I don't really talk to very many people who are progressive about gender and also really strongly identify with it. So
yeah.
it's nice to get to talk to somebody like that.
And okay, this is just interesting. It's not academic, but okay. So obviously, I date women, and I find that when I'm in those spaces heavily, my performance of gender changes based on that context as well. And depending on what kind of relationship I'm in, my performance of gender changes in terms of that. So that's when I say, like for me, that gender sort of is this meaningless thing that only has use in context. I really mean that because there is something essential to it that I identify with, but what it actually constitutes changes depending on the setting I'm in, but depending on what I want, depending on circumstances. So like, and I don't want to shill my own stuff, but like this is interesting to me in terms of like what it means to be a bimbo, because I think bimbos actively reject any sort of solid meaning. They're not trying to be something. They're just like, it's just appearance. It doesn't have any solid meaning underneath or descriptive meaning. It's a performance that isn't sort of grounded in anything. And I think something can both be performative and be real and not have meaning and have meaning in a moment. So I don't, yeah, maybe I've just confused it more and we should leave it because
What you just said though, is that at all surprising? I mean, we all have like different faces, right? That we have depending on the context, on the relationships, how we relate to other people, right? So me as Prime, a streamer, right? So the audience knows me as a streamer. Joe knows me as a friend, but Joe doesn't know me. None of you know me as a son, as a brother or a cousin.
not yet.
You don't know me in any of those, right? In those different contexts, like people will have completely different experiences of me, right? As an employee, it's a different context, right? So you being in certain relationships, right, with these maybe different types of women, or women with different power dynamics, right, and you behaving differently, it's like it doesn't seem at all just surprising to me.
And I guess it relates to what Alice was saying, which is what is gender and what is just you. And I guess part of that question for me is I'm saying specifically in this instance, I operationalize gender in different ways depending on context. So it's a conscious decision sometimes unconscious, but there are elements which I'm like, wow, I'm acting very differently and presenting my gender in a very different way in this context.
I mean, I definitely do that too. But my motivation is different, and my motivation is very clear to me. When I'm in a social situation with my friends, I don't have to worry about whether they're going to see me as a woman or see me as a man. I can be entirely myself and not have to worry at all. But in society, in public, when I go to the grocery store and I go buy shit and try to check out in the checkout line, my presentation and the way that I talk and what I'm wearing, they all change how the cashier is going to refer to me, and whether it's going to trigger dysphoria for me, and whether, so for me, like, that is like always a conscious thing for me. It's like, what am I going to be applied today? What's society going to push on me today? Are they going to misgender me? Are they going to see me as a male? Are they going to apply man to me? Or are they going to see me as female? Are they going to apply woman to me? And like, my sense of gender is not about the things that make me me. My sense of gender is about what society forces onto me. Like, the things that make me me, they're always going to make me me. When I'm at the grocery store, I still like the same music that I like, and I still dress the same that I dress, and I still have the same friends that I have, and I still have the same interests that I have, and I still am really like analytically and science minded, but I also really still like people, and I am a very like introspective person, and I cry a lot, and like all these things are true about me all the time. But society pushes on me what they're going to apply to me, what expectations I'm going to get that day. And they push it based on what they see in my presentation and how I talk and what my face looks like and all these different things. And that's the shit that I hate.
Yeah. And I mean, and we're back to this point where I don't think it's not even a disagreement. It's that, like, it's so interesting for me, having never had any experience other than this. I can't disentangle what is me and what is gender being pushed on me, because there are certain things, like, even, I gesticulate in a particularly feminine way, but I've never gesticulated in any other way. So am I being forced to talk like this and speak like this, or is this just who I am? And I guess what you're saying is, we abolish gender and you keep doing that, then that's just you and that's got nothing to do with gender. But
you're talking about things that they're just you.
But this is associated with gender, and it's like, these are soft hands, these are dancing hands, and it's something we know doesn't. A lot of trans women go and they get lessons in body language to change their body language. So clearly there is a gendered element to it.
Yeah, but it's societally applied, right? So like that application of trying to change body language, or my voice training. These are things that, society genders, but they're not inherently gendered. Well, they're inherently sexed. Like, my voice is inherently sexed, right? And body language is actually similar. So the reason that body language develops like it does is because there's actually physiological differences in women's or in females, like development and bone structure and how their bodies are oriented. There's literally differences. And some of it is social and some of it is biological. And it's like, you can't separate it out very easily. It's really, really complicated. So like, a lot of the things that you just talked about, some of them are literally just, societal things based on sex. Some of them are gendered concepts. Some of the, like, you just can't disentangle all these things. So yeah, it's hard. And like the voice thing, like that's what I talked about in the panel. Like, the thing that I'm doing with my voice, first off, I did voice training with the goal of a voice that I liked and that was relaxing and that was more close to the female side of things, but wasn't like, I wasn't going to try to get like a Valley Girl accent, because I don't like Valley Girl accents very much. But if I did, then I would be a lot more feminine. If I like did this with my voice all the time, like, I think I'd have way less problems. But then people would think that I was a Valley Girl, and I don't really like that. But anyway, the point is, my voice, I did voice training and I specifically targeted androgyny. I targeted the feminine side of androgyny. And yeah.
But that's so interesting to me, right? Because even if I'm in an academic setting and I'm presenting a paper, I will underpitch my voice because I associate authority with masculine norms. So the lower I can get my voice, the more seriously I'm going to be taken. People, I was talking to some people about my bimbo video before, and someone's like, I just can't watch it. I can't stand the voice because it's a high-pitched voice like this, where it's a girl talking in the way that we associate women talking, and women aren't serious, and women are so annoying and so shrill and so awful to listen to. Who could do it, you know? But it's like, it's interesting that even for me, when I want to seem like I'm an authority, I instantly underpitch my voice.
Yeah, you drop the pitch of your voice down so that you start sounding, more close
serious.
to masculine. Yeah, more serious.
Rather than silly.
Yeah, right. The silly serious. I just think things like that are so interesting, and that gets like well outside of the gender abolition thing. That just gets into descriptive, like why do we associate some voices with male and some voices with female? Like, what is actually causing that? And that's a physiological answer. The answer is that, like, it's not about the pitch of your voice, because my pitch is actually about the same as Prime's pitch. Well, no, Prime's a little lower than my pitch. But anyway, voice pitch doesn't really matter that much. It's really more about, like, the resonance that you have in your voice, because this is, like, low pitch, high resonance. Like, the things that we think are male or female aren't, they're that we associate to a woman or a man, like voice-wise, they're actually like physiological differences. So,
but I mean, it's interesting, right? Because like you can say that that's totally separate from abolition, but it's not, because even the association between a particular kind of voice and authority is a sexist trope. So these are the sort of things we'd be looking at getting rid of. Yeah.
Even though it's something that's sex, really, right? Because it's like a sex trait, it's also something that we apply to social meaning to. And so as we start demolishing that social meaning, it starts being less meaningful in general.
Yeah.
We stop associating lower pitches to authority, and we stop having that type of issue, and we stop doing that code switching. And so it gets really interesting.
So, all right, I want to get back to get off the yard because they were advancing something, but I had another question for you, Alice, in terms of like how you described your trans identity, and I hope this is not too off topic, but how you specifically described it, and maybe you think of it in other terms as well, but how you specifically described it is like you had a problem with your male presentation, like your male physical characteristics, right? And so rather than describing it, and specifically said, like, I don't really care about the woman category, the woman identification. So if we had, and this is obviously theoretical, but if we had a third morphological category of human, right? Like, would that be equally as valid to you? Like, would you have chosen the female category or the category? I don't know.
The category. I'm probably closer to non-binary than I am to binary trans. It's just that I also address that society right now is binary, and that I can do everything I want to disidentify with woman, but I'm still going to get applied it. So there's not really any way to, if I take hormones and I go on hormones and I look female and I want to look female, then just disidentifying with women for my ideology just doesn't make a lot of sense for my mental health. So instead, I don't do that.
And it's super interesting. So I have a friend who is non-binary, but did transition, is a trans man physically, and really struggles because they never get identified as non-binary, because now they look very much like a man. And it's interesting how that has sort of progressed in terms of how difficult, talking again about how categories create exclusions, and exclusions are treated as deviant and deviancy is punished. Like, it is really difficult to exist outside of the categories that exist, even if that's truly how you identify as something in the gaps that has no language or categorization.
And when you describe it, you just mumble some sounds and that'll do it. Okay, yeah, I think that's really interesting. So it's more a rejection of the masculine rather than an acceptance of the feminine for you?
Yes. Yes. But I am, so here's the thing, and people keep calling me on this, so like, just to address it, like, I am pretty feminine, right? Like, I fit into femininity pretty well. So like, there's lots of reasons why I'm applied that category. I I fit into it really well. So
Mm.
like society applies me into woman because I fit into woman really well right now most of the time. There's like some stuff that doesn't, some stuff that does, but it's more complicated, right? So
Prime, also just quickly, you touched on something really interesting, and I don't think you did it consciously, but you actually made an incredible point, which is the point of the French existentialists that view that there is no such thing as man and woman. There is only such thing as man and other, and that the woman is defined as not man. So you can be man or not man, that femininity and womanhood is by definition empty and means nothing other than showing that you're not part of that group. So that's like Simone de Beauvoir. You were basically this panel's version of like Simone de Beauvoir, Luce Irigaray. That was you right there.
Okay, Joe. So So no, you already know this is a personal thing. Joe knows I have these questions for her, right? Because like my time with her is very limited.
Oh, fuck.
So I have like literally questions for her. No, I'm not gonna do that thing which you're thinking of right now.
Yeah, I know.
No, that's coming later. Don't worry, it's happening. But one of them, and this has come from months ago. We talked about French existentialism, right? You had brought it up, right? And you were talking about how you were teaching them to your students, right? And I'm like, I'm gonna freaking loan this thing. And so
you've learned about French. So actually you did that intentionally.
Yeah.
I knew it.
Yeah, you knew it. Okay, sure. Underestimated
No,
me.
I didn't.
Okay. But anyway, so let's go to get off my yard because they've been trying to clarify themselves. So they were saying, okay, I was asking, how do we know when we are improving in a position way in gender abolition? Sorry. What is the metric we can look at to see progress? Okay, so how do we know we're improving? And then also they said, how do you push gender abolition and still respect those that see value in gender differences, not in an oppressive way? So both of those things. Like, where are the metrics to get to gender abolition, right? And then how do you push for gender abolition and still respecting them, gender differences?
okay. So metrics aren't relevant when the goal is essentially natural if we go about dealing with gender in a way that's progressive. So we don't have a metric to say, yep, we're done with gender abolition. There's just, it doesn't really fit in very well with my view of gender abolition. Joe, I'm not sure if you've come to any other different conclusion than I have on that, but I don't really see any need for a metric here.
I would say, look, if we were going to say there was a need for a metric, it would only be in what you've said in terms of gender abolition being a long-term project and overhauling patriarchy is a short-term project. Correlation, just because you can't have causation in social science doesn't mean that correlation is meaningless. We use correlation to measure things and make, we conclude things off correlation, even if we're saying that it's not causation. So I can just say, oh, there's a strong correlation between women presenting themselves as maternal and them having successful tenures in leadership. And that doesn't mean that women presenting themselves in a maternal way is causing that success in leadership. But what I can say is, isn't that interesting? Look at this correlation. I can then go back in 10 years and see if that correlation has changed, and I can measure it based on changes in correlation, changes in the data, even if I'm not making a causative statement. So when it comes to, it's important in this aspect, and that Alice and I have clarified that over time, we would need to be reducing oppressive structures and reducing these sorts of socially created oppressive features before we get rid of concepts, because these two things will happen naturally. If we reduce the amount of oppression, gender-based oppression in society, that too will change the concepts. And so what we could do is look at correlation to be like, oh, wow, look, there are really bad gender norms that exist in society, and there are high levels of domestic violence. Isn't it interesting how those two things correlate? And if we see a change in oppressive structures and that causes a change in domestic violence rates, then we have more evidence to suggest that there is a relationship there. We just never say that those two things are causative. And that relationship would be enough for us to say, okay, we should continue to change these norms because that continues to have an effect on domestic violence rates. So we could say the correlation between gender as a concept and these oppressive things, there is a correlative structure there. So as we change oppression, does that change the concept? As we change the concept, does that change oppression. Isn't that interesting? Oh, there seems to be a very strong correlation. We should keep doing this because we can see that tracking in the right direction. Does that make sense? You don't need it. You don't need it to be causative to still be a metric tracker that you can use to show progress.
Yeah, you could just show that, you know, these harmful norms are becoming less common, and we're seeing also these other things reducing in society, and we're improving this hierarchical, you know, oppression issue. You know, we can just the same way we would view any other feminism. We don't necessarily have like statistics on this that we have to like go, yeah, when we get to 5%, we're good. You know, there's not like a metric like that. The other side of the question, how do you push gender abolition and respect those that see value in gender differences? We just talked. So it depends on what you mean. If you mean somebody like Jo, who finds value in her own gender identity and her gender and the sense for her, we don't have to do anything. Those people are going to still be able to be themselves to the same extent they are right now. We're not changing anything about that. But if you mean people who are regressive about gender or traditionalist about gender, to be dead honest with you, I don't care about those people. I think that the view that they have is not correct. So with those people, I'd have to essentially sit down and convince them of why traditionalist views of gender are not correct. If I'm dealing with somebody who's just straight up a, like, you know, anti-feminist or something like that, I'm not really going to focus on them in this, you know, this plan, right? I'm not necessarily going to be able to. I can hope that I can convince them with the strength of the argument that we have for feminism, but if I can't do that, then I don't need to include that person very well. Like, I'm not going to need to care about the people who are traditionalist in gender roles and are regressive about gender. I don't need to plan for them. That's not something I have to do.
Definitely.
Okay.
It'd be like asking a communist what they're going to do about capitalists.
Yeah. What are you going to do about people who love money?
Take their money away? I don't know.
That's where we start. Anyway, I think we don't have any more questions, which is unfortunate because I think this is super, super interesting. And all right, but yeah, thank you both.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alice.
Thank you. This has been so nice. Thank you, Prime,
Yeah.
and thank you, Jo, for like wanting to do this. I was so surprised because I was like, this is never gonna happen because I'm just a random person, and like this has been so nice.
No, it's been so fun and like really, really good for me to like, yeah, this has been good.
Yeah, it helped move my worldview forwards, and that is what I want out of these. Like Prime, like that's why I'm on these panels with you. Is like I don't have an audience. I do this for fun, and I do this because I like learning and I like being able to get new positions. That's why like I go absolutely nuclear when people are like really bad faith with me, because like I'm not here to do that. Like I don't mind blood sports, but I want to learn, and when I learn nothing, I'm upset. So.
I'm gonna send you that paper by Zarelli as well, because I'm sure she can talk about it a lot better than I ever could, and it's a really fun paper to read as well. And I'll put it in the chat just in case anyone else wants it.
Okay, so why don't we do this? To my audience, what's going to happen is we're going to roll into a walk-on panel. We're going to roll there, and members of the audience like you, yes, you sitting at home, and participate. All right, so the stream is not ending. The stream is not ending. Oh God, the stream is not ending.
It's ending.
But no, it's not.
Ending.
It's not ending. No, it's not.
Ending.
Sit right there. I'm gonna give these wonderful ladies an outro. First of all, Alice, after all, you're like not a nobody. You're a big somebody, at least in this channel.
Big
Goddammit.
somebody.
Yeah, we really like having you. So we keep having you back, and we thank Eris for being so kind as to introduce you to the channel. You know, yeah, you've been a great find as just a panelist and as just a person to talk to. So we would definitely enjoy you here. And when it seemed like you two wanted to talk about this, I'm like, yes, I know this is going to be great. I know this is going to be magic. So I was happy to have you. So yeah, Alice, you're somebody. I don't know what to say there. I feel like this is really awkward.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So tell the world about yourself.
Sure. I was like, yeah. I stream on Twitch sometimes. I'm usually here on Tuesdays for the Amazon Lily panel, but I'll try to be at other ones. I am trying to actually get my own stream schedule together, but life exists. You can find me on Calliopean Club. Go join Calliopean Club. Ignore all the mean people that don't like our new change. We just redid our server and it looks beautiful and you'll love it. Yeah, thank you, as always, Prime, for having me on here. This is so nice.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, next. Everyone at home.
Jesus.
I think some of you may not have heard the news, right?
Oh my God.
BreadTube is collapsing. It's amazing. The audience is abandoning them at breakneck speeds, right? They found out those people that they've loved for so long, for so many years, right? They simply can't compete in the marketplace of ideas. Jill TheSillySerious has released a video. She has released a video. She stepped into the ring, and the others are simply giving up. Joe has...
I'm not looking to abolish BreadTube. I am looking to expand the category of BreadTube to include me.
No, look. The world sees it differently. See, Joe here has already turned down interviews from the New York Times, Washington Post, like desperately wanting to get her on to understand, like, what is this revolution she started on social media. She's turned them down because Joe is too concerned about, like, not concerned about going Hollywood or anything like that. She wants to stay real with the people, right? But Joe will come to this channel and spread the good news that yes, you can get more of her on her YouTube channel, !Joe in chat, or !Silly, or !Serious. All of them lead you to the same place, to Nirvana. That's the place. So click on that link. Go to Joe's YouTube channel. Yes, she has a video on her channel titled Bimbo Philosophy, and check it out. You'll like it a lot. So Joe, oh my God, don't ask that question. Joe. Put out did amazing work. I've already seen the video. It's blown my mind, all right? And I want to do you the favor. I want to get you to the place that I'm at, right? This place of pure zen. Watch the video. Go follow her or subscribe to her on YouTube. Don't follow. Subscribe to her on YouTube, and follow her on Twitch. So both of their links are there. Check it out, Joe.
Yes.
I think you've already proven as to why they should already follow and subscribe to you. But in case they've forgotten.
But if you watch my video and you listen at all, and you're interested in the philosophy which I cover, which is Nietzsche and Baudrillard most specifically, but also a little bit of French existentialism, which I know you love, Prime. Mm-hmm. And you want to learn more, because I'm doing the video that is on YouTube is in character. I am playing a bimbo. But if you would like me to more rigorously go through these ideas, I will be doing a Twitch stream where I look specifically at simulacra and simulation and seduction from Baudrillard, and beyond good and evil and genealogy of morals from Nietzsche. So if you're interested in learning more about that, you can come to the Twitch stream, but watch the video first. And if you look at my boobs, you have to comment. That's the rule. I don't make the rules. That's the rule.
That's the rule.
I don't make the rules.
Everyone, the link to Joe's channel is in chat. Go check out her video. I liked it a lot. At the end of it, seriously, I was like, I wish there was more of this, right? And Joe will provide you more on her Twitch stream. So follow both her accounts. They're both there. Okay, so thanks so much once again. Now, we are moving on. Anyone here, of course, is welcome to join us, and we would love if you both did. But I know real life is a thing. If not, that's okay. Thank you for spending your time, your energy, your passion, and your knowledge, lots of knowledge here, with my audience. I know they appreciate it just as much as I do. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, bye.